Hey guys, tonight we begin with the itchy, smelly, and dangerously unwashed world of the Middle Ages. A time when cleanliness wasn't just next to godliness, it was next to impossible. A world where taking a bath could be a medical risk, drinking water was a death wish, and the streets were paved not with gold, but with things we politely flush away today. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Imagine the air in the room is stagnant, heavy with the accumulated warmth of too many bodies sleeping in too small a space. It is pitch black. The shutters close tight against the night air, which everyone knows carries disease. The temperature is cool, a damp chill that clings to the stone floor and seeps up through the legs of the wooden bed frame. You can hear the rhythmic breathing of your family, the rustle of straw, and the faint, high-pitched whine of a mosquito that has somehow survived the smoke from the hearth. The smell is the first thing that hits you. It isn't a sharp smell. It is a dull, pervasive background note of unwashed wool, stale sweat, ancient wood smoke, and the chamber pot in the corner. It is the scent of humanity packed into a box without plumbing. You shift under the rough blanket. The wool is scratchy against your skin. You feel a tiny, tickling sensation on your ankle. A movement. You don't swat at it. You're too tired. You just rub your foot against the sheet, hoping to dislodge the flea that is sharing your warmth. Congratulations, you've just woken up in the year 1350. The good news, you're alive. The bad news, you smell terrible. And the law, the church and the doctor all agree that you should stay that way. In the modern world, we start our day with a shower. We stand under a stream of hot, clean, pressurized water. We use soap that smells of ocean breeze or cucumber. We brush our teeth with mint. We deodorize. We are obsessed with removing the evidence of our own biology. But in the medieval city, biology is the dominant force. And fighting it is dangerous. You sit up. Your hair feels heavy, matted against your scalp. You haven't washed it in... well, you can't remember. Washing your hair requires water, soap and time, three things that are in short supply. Besides, the physicians say that washing your head opens the pores to the cold humours, which leads to madness. So, you keep your natural oils, all of them. You reach for your clothes, they are the same clothes you wore yesterday. And the day before, and last week. They are made of wool and linen. The linen undergarment, the chemise, is your only defence against the grime. It absorbs your sweat. It absorbs the oil. In theory, you are supposed to wash the linen often. In practice, it is Monday, and wash day is a monthly event that requires a cauldron and back-breaking labour. So you put the slightly damp, stiff linen back on. It feels cold against your skin. Then the wool tunic. It smells of the street, mud, smoke, and animals. You need to wash your face, just the face. That is allowed. You go to the basin in the corner. There is a pitcher of water. It has been sitting there all night. A thin film of dust floats on the surface. You dip your hands in. The water is freezing. You splash it on your face. It wakes you up, shocking your skin. You grab a rough cloth. Toweling was not a luxury item, it was an abrasive tool. And scrub. You are clean. Or at least the parts of you that the neighbours can see are clean. The rest of you is a private ecosystem of sweat and bacteria. But now, you are thirsty. This is the first deadly decision of your day. In your room, there's a bucket of water drawn from the river yesterday, or perhaps from the public conduit in the square. You look at it. It is slightly cloudy. There is a bit of sediment at the bottom. If you drink this, you are rolling the dice. The river where this water came from is the same river where the tanners wash their hides with urine and lime. It is the same river where the butchers dump the offal. It is the same river where the gong farmers empty the cesspits at night. You know this. Everyone knows this. The water eats the gut, the old women say. But you are parched. You have two choices. You can drink the water and risk the flux, dysentery, which will turn your insides to liquid and kill you in 3 days. Or you can drink small beer. Small beer is the fuel of the Middle Ages. It is weak alcohol, maybe 1% or 2%. Just enough alcohol to kill the worst of the bacteria, but not enough to make you drunk before breakfast. It is thick. It is nutritious. It tastes like liquid bread. You choose the beer. You dip a wooden ladle into the barrel. You drink. It is warm, flat and sour, but it is safe. You have survived the first hygiene test of the morning. You are dehydrated, but you're not poisoned. But now you have to go outside, and outside is where the real filth lives. The medieval street is not a road. It is a barnyard, a sewer, and a garbage dump rolled into one narrow alleyway. You open your door. The smell hits you like a physical blow. It is a complex bouquet. The base note is horse manure, tons of it, deposited daily by the thousands of animals that power the city. The middle note is rotting vegetable matter, cabbage leaves, turnip peels, apple cores, thrown into the street because there is no trash collection. And the top note? The sharp, stinging scent of ammonia, because your neighbour, lacking a cesspit, has just emptied their chamber pot out the window. Gardyloo! Look out for the water. Splash! You step out. You are wearing your boots. They are made of thick leather, greased with animal fat to keep the water out. You need them. The muck in the street is ankle deep. It is a slurry of mud and waste. You navigate the street carefully. You walk in the middle on the crown of the road where it is highest. The sides are gutters, running with dark liquid. You're walking through a biological hazard zone to get to work, and as you dodge a pig that is rooting through a pile of garbage, yes, pigs roamed the streets freely as unpaid garbage collectors, you realise something profound. In this world, cleanliness is not a state of being. It is a constant losing battle against the environment. But you are tough. You are a medieval urbanite. You ignore the smell. You ignore the mud. You have to get to the barber, because your tooth hurts. And in the Middle Ages, dental hygiene is a form of torture. The barber-surgeon's shop is a sensory assault, but of a different kind. It smells of dried blood, stale wine and singed hair. The air is warm, humid from the bowl of hot water sitting on the brazier. You step inside, your heavy boots thudding on the wooden floorboards, leaving muddy prints that the apprentice will have to scrub later with sand. You are here for your tooth. It has been throbbing for days, a dull rhythmic ache that feels like a tiny hammer beating against your jawbone. You've tried the home remedies, you chewed on a clove, you rinsed your mouth with vinegar, you even held a roasted onion against your cheek because your grandmother said it would draw the worm out. Yes, the worm. In the medieval mind, tooth decay wasn't caused by sugar or plaque, it was caused by a toothworm, a tiny evil creature that burrowed into your tooth and ate the roots. The pain was the worm wriggling. The barber motions for you to sit. The chair is sturdy oak, stained dark. He looks at your mouth. He doesn't wash his hands. Why would he? His hands are clean enough. He wiped them on his apron after the last customer. He picks up his tools. They are iron. They are not shiny. They look like something you would use to fix a wagon wheel. The worm is deep, he says solemnly. He offers you the only anaesthesia available. A cup of strong wine mixed with herbs. You drink it. It burns your throat, but it dulls the edge of the panic rising in your chest. He picks up the pelican. This is a tool named for the shape of its beak. It is a lever. He hooks the claw over your tooth. He rests the metal shaft against your gum, and he twists. The sensory reality of medieval dentistry is sound. The crunch of the enamel breaking, the snap of the root separating from the jaw. The sound vibrates through your skull, louder than any scream. You taste blood. Hot, metallic, salty. It fills your mouth. He pulls the tooth out. He holds it up. There is a dangling nerve ending. See, he says triumphantly, there is the worm. He packs the hole in your gum with a piece of linen soaked in wine. Or maybe cobwebs. Cobwebs were thought to stop bleeding. You sit there, dizzy, spitting blood into a bowl of sawdust. You pay him a penny. You have lost a tooth, but you have gained freedom from the worm. But dental hygiene wasn't just about pulling teeth. It was about cleaning them, or trying to. The medieval toothbrush did not exist. Instead, you used a chew stick, a twig of hazel or rosemary, frayed at the end to make a brush. Or you used a rubbing cloth, a piece of linen wrapped around your finger, and the toothpaste, powdered cuttlefish bone, crushed eggshells, pumice, or, if you wanted to be fancy, powdered alabaster mixed with honey. Imagine the sensation. You're scrubbing your teeth with rock dust. It is gritty. It tastes of chalk. It scrapes the plaque off, but it also scrapes the enamel off. You are slowly sanding your own teeth away in the name of cleanliness. And to freshen your breath, you chewed fennel seeds, or parsley, or mint, anything to mask the smell of the rotting meat stuck between your molars. Because bad breath wasn't just embarrassing, it was dangerous. The miasma. People believed that bad smells carried disease. If your breath smelled bad, it meant your insides were rotting. It meant you were a source of contagion. So you chewed the seeds, you rinsed with wine, you kept your mouth shut in public. But let's leave the barber's shop. Your jaw aches, but the sun is up. And you have to go to the bathhouse. Wait, didn't we say bathing was dangerous? Yes, but sometimes you did it anyway. Because you were dirty, or because you wanted to meet people. The medieval bathhouse was not a spa. It was a social club with steam. You walk through the narrow streets, you see the sign. A wooden board with a painting of a person in a tub. You enter. The air changes instantly. It is hot, steamy. It smells of wood smoke, heating the water, and herbs, lavender, rosemary, thyme, thrown into the water to sweeten it. And it smells of bodies, lots of them. Public bathing was communal. You didn't get a private tub. You shared a large wooden vat with strangers. You strip off your clothes. You climb in. The water is hot. It feels amazing on your skin, soaking away the grime of the street. You lean back against the wood, but then you look at the water. It is cloudy. It has a film on top. How many people have been in this water before you? The man next to you coughs. The woman across from you has a rash on her arm. You realize that while the heat feels good, the water is a soup of everyone else's bacteria. Physicians warned against this. They said that heat opened the pores, and if the pores were open, the bad air could get in. The miasma could enter your body and strike your heart, so you don't stay long. You scrub quickly with a handful of soapwort, a plant that lathers, or soft soap made of animal fat and wood ash. It smells pungent like clean grease. You get out. You dry off vigorously with a rough cloth. You have to close the pores. You rub your skin until it is red. You dress quickly. You wrap your head in a hood to protect your wet hair from the air. You leave the bathhouse. You feel clean, but you also feel vulnerable. You have exposed your body to the elements. You hurry home, dodging the puddles, holding your breath against the smell of the tanner's yard. But as you walk, you notice something on your arm, a red spot. Is it a flea bite, or is it something else? You scratch it. In the Middle Ages, an itch is never just an itch. It is a warning. But let's ignore the itch for now. You are hungry, and you have to go to the market to buy meat. But remember, there is no refrigerator. The market is a cacophony of sound and smell. You're hungry, but your appetite battles with your nose. You walk past the fishmonger. The fish are laid out on wooden boards, glistening in the sun. They were caught this morning, or maybe yesterday. You lean in. You smell the brine. You smell the faint, unmistakable scent of ammonia. Fresh, the fishmonger shouts. He waves a horsetail switch to scatter the flies. The flies are the unofficial inspectors of the medieval market. If they are buzzing, there is meat. If there are maggots, there is a discount. You move to the butcher. A pig hangs from a hook. It has been slaughtered recently. The blood is still dripping into a bucket filled with sawdust. The butcher is chopping a joint with a cleaver. Thwack! You buy a piece of pork. It is wrapped in a cabbage leaf. You hold it tight. You know you have to cook it now. Why? Because preservatives are expensive. Salt. We've talked about the salt tax. Salt is white gold. If you can't afford enough salt to cure the meat completely, you use just enough to delay the rot. So you have green meat, meat that is on the edge. You hurry home, you light the fire, you boil the meat. Boiling is safer than roasting, it kills more things. You add herbs, sage, mint, garlic. Not just for flavour, but to mask the taste if the meat is turned. You sit down to eat. You don't have a fork. Forks are Italian, effeminate and suspicious. You have a knife and a spoon. You use your fingers, and this is where hygiene fails again. You washed your hands this morning, but since then, you have touched the street mud, the bathhouse bench, the money, the fish, the pig. You wipe your hands on your tunic, you pick up the meat, you eat. You're inoculating yourself with the city every time you take a bite. But let's look at the plate itself. If you are poor, you use a trencher, a slice of stale bread. If you are rich, you use pewter. We talked about lead in pewter, but let's look at the cleaning of the pewter. How do you wash dishes without running water? You use sand. You use straw. You use scouring rush, horsetail plant. You scrub the grease off the plate, but you rinse it in a bucket of water that has been used for 5 other plates. The grease floats on top, a thin rainbow film of animal fat. The plates are never truly clean. They're just wiped. And the wooden bowls? Wood is porous. It absorbs the soup. It absorbs the bacteria. Every time you pour hot broth into the bowl, you're waking up the ghosts of previous meals. But let's leave the kitchen. Let's go to the most dangerous room in the house, the privy, the toilet. If you're lucky, you have a garderobe. A small room projecting from the wall of the castle or house. A hole in a wooden bench. Gravity takes the waste down a chute and into the moat or a cesspit below. The sensory reality of the garderobe is the draft. The wind blows up the chute. It brings the smell of the pit right into your house. It brings the flies. And the wiping? You don't have paper. Paper is for Bibles. You use moss. You use hay. You use a sponge on a stick if you are Roman. Or you use a groom of the stool if you are the king. But most people, you use your left hand and a bucket of water. This is why you never eat with your left hand. It is the unclean hand. It is a hygiene rule born of necessity. But what happens when the pit fills up? We met the gong farmer, but let's look at his tools. He has a bucket, he has a shovel, he has a lantern, but he also has a bird, a canary in a cage, or sometimes a chicken. He lowers the bird into the pit first. If the bird dies, bad air, hydrogen sulfide, methane. He waits. He lets the pit breathe. He is risking his life to empty your toilet. And where does he put it? In the river, or on the fields, the night soil. The waste from the city is carted out to the farms. It is spread on the crops. The wheat grows tall and green. You eat the bread made from the wheat. The cycle is complete. You're eating the city's waste transformed by sunlight and soil. It is sustainable, but it is also a closed loop of parasites. Worms, roundworms, tapeworms, whipworms. Archaeologists have found medieval latrines filled with worm eggs. Everyone had them. Kings, peasants, knights. You lived with a colony inside you. They ate your food. They made you tired. They made you itch. And there was no cure. Maybe bitter wormwood tea. But mostly, you just endured. And as you sit there, digesting your boiled pork, feeling the rumble in your stomach that might be digestion or might be a worm, you realize the medieval body was a crowded place, but the night is coming. And with the night comes the cold. And the need for warmth brings a new hygiene challenge. The bed. We talked about bed bugs, but let's talk about bed sharing. You don't sleep alone. You sleep with your spouse, your children, maybe a servant, maybe a guest. Bundling. To stay warm, you pack bodies together. The sensory reality is the breath. You're breathing the same air as 4 other people. If one of them has a cough, you all have a cough. If one of them has lice, you all have lice. Lice were so common they were almost pets. The companion of man. People would groom each other, picking lice out of hair. It was a social activity, like monkeys. Nitpicking. The sensory detail is the pop. You find a louse. You crack it between your thumbnails. Snap. A tiny burst of blood. You do this by the firelight. It is intimate. It is gross. It is necessary. But sometimes the lice carried something worse than an itch. Typhus. We mentioned it before. But the sensory experience of typhus is the fog. You get a headache. A terrible, crushing headache. Then a fever. Then a rash. Red spots that turn purple. You become delirious. You enter a stupor. The lice are moving from your feverish body to the cooler bodies of your family. You are a vector. And as you lie there, scratching your head, listening to the breathing of your children, you wonder, is there any way to be clean? To be truly, safely clean? Maybe. But it requires something you don't have. Linen? Lots of it. White, crisp, boiled linen. The rich believed that linen cleaned the body by absorbing the sweat. If you changed your linen shirt every day, you didn't need to bathe. I am clean, the Duke says. Look at my shirt. He smells of musk and old sweat. But his collar is white. It was hygiene as a visual trick. But you have one shirt. So you scratch, and you sleep. And tomorrow you have to deal with the laundry. But not your laundry. The hospital laundry. Because you have decided to visit the infirmary. The infirmary. It sounds like a place of rest, doesn't it? A sanctuary of healing run by gentle monks or nuns. But as you step through the heavy oak doors, the first thing that hits you is not the smell of incense, but the smell of vinegar. Vinegar was the medieval disinfectant. It was sprinkled on the floor, washed over the walls, and held under the noses of the staff. You're here because the rash on your arm, the one you scratched earlier, has turned angry. It is red, hot, and throbbing. You fear it is St. Anthony's fire, ergotism, or perhaps the pox, syphilis later on, but let's stick to general infection for now. The hospital is a long hall lined with beds. But the beds are not private, they're communal. 2, 3, sometimes 4 patients to a bed. The sensory reality is the heat of the neighbour. You are feverish. But the person next to you is shivering. Their skin touches yours. Their sweat mingles with yours. You're sharing a mattress with a stranger's illness. The sheets are linen, yes, but they are grey. They have been washed in lye, but the stains of blood and pus remain as faint yellowish maps of previous suffering. The monks do their best. They bring you pottage, a thin vegetable soup. It is warm, it is comforting. But then the surgeon arrives. He's not a monk. He is a layman. He carries a box of tools. He looks at your arm. It must be lanced, he says. We talked about lancing, but here, in the hospital, the danger is hospital gangrene. The tools are wiped on a cloth, the same cloth used for the last patient. He cuts. You scream. He dresses the wound with lint, scraped linen, and honey. Honey is actually good. It is antibacterial. It is one of the few things they got right. But then he adds cobwebs to stop the bleeding. You watch as he pulls a handful of dusty grey web from the corner of the room. It is full of dead flies. He stuffs it into your open wound. You are being packed with dust. He bandages it. Rest, he says. You lie back. You try to sleep. But the man next to you is coughing, a wet, rattling cough. He spits into a bowl, or on the floor. The miasma in the room is palpable. You can feel the bad air settling on your skin like a fine mist. To combat it, the nuns burn juniper. The smoke fills the hall. It smells like gin and pine. It makes your eyes water, but it masks the smell of the gangrene. It is aromatherapy for the dying. But let's leave the hospital and go to the street again. Because there is a profession dedicated to cleaning up the mess. The raker, not the gong farmer who does cesspits. The raker cleans the street. He has a cart. He has a rake. He shovels the mud, the manure, the dead cats, the vegetable peelings. The sensory experience is the weight of the muck. It is heavy, wet. It sucks at his shovel. He piles it into the cart. He takes it to the lay stall, a giant mound of garbage outside the city walls. The lay stall is a mountain of rot. It generates heat. It steams in the winter. Poor people go there. They scavenge. They look for bones, for glue, rags, for paper, metal. They are the recyclers of the city. They live on the waste. But the raker has a problem, the pigs. Pigs roam the streets. They eat the garbage before he can rake it. The city tries to ban them. No pigs in the street, but the pigs are faster than the rakers, and they are hungry. So the streets remain a battleground between the cleaner and the animal. But let's look at personal grooming again. Specifically, the hair. We talked about lice. But what about washing? Soap was harsh. It was made of tallow and wood ash. It smelled of fat. If you washed your hair with it, it left a residue, a sticky grey film. So women used lye, diluted, to bleach it, but also vinegar to rinse it. The sensory reality of medieval hair is the tangle. You don't wash it often, you comb it, you brush it, you braid it tight to keep it clean. But underneath the wimple, the scalp itches, the oils build up. When you finally unbraid it, the smell is distinct, musky, human. Rich women used powder, orris root, violet powder, to absorb the oil. They were dry shampooing centuries before it was a product, but the most dangerous cosmetic wasn't for the hair, it was for the skin. Depilatory, hair removal, they used quicklime, calcium oxide, and orpiment, arsenic sulfide. They made a paste, they applied it to the skin. Leave it on until it burns, the manual says, then wash it off. The sensory horror, the stinging, the chemical burn, the smell of burning hair and sulphur. If you left it too long, it took the skin off with the hair. You were literally burning yourself smooth, and as you lie in the hospital bed, your arm throbbing, your hair itching, your nose filled with juniper smoke, you realise the medieval body was a landscape under siege. From the inside, worms. From the outside, fleas. From the air, miasma. And from the cure, arsenic. But the night is deep. The raker has finished his rounds. The pigs are sleeping in the alleys. You are safe. Until tomorrow, when the leech collector comes to sell her jar, and the doctor decides you need another bleeding. Sleep well. The leech collector has arrived. She's standing at the door of the infirmary, her skirt hiked up, revealing legs scarred with the circular marks of her trade. She holds a jar. Inside, the black ribbons of Hirudo medicinalis are swimming in murky water. The doctor buys the jar. He needs them. The fever ward is full. He approaches your bed. More bad blood, he mutters. You're too weak to argue. You watch as he fishes a fresh leech from the jar. It is lively, hungry. He places it on your temple, for the headache, the sensory reality, the cold, wet kiss, the pulsing. You can hear the leech feeding. A tiny rhythmic sucking sound right next to your ear. You close your eyes. You try to think of something else. You think of the sweat house, the medieval sauna. In some parts of Europe, especially the north, they used sweat houses to clean the body. A small stone hut, a fire, water thrown on hot rocks. The sensory experience is the purge. You sit in the dark, naked. The steam is intense. You sweat. You sweat until you are dizzy. You hit yourself with birch branches to stimulate the blood. Then you run out into the snow, or the cold river. The shock, the gasp, the feeling of your skin tightening. It was the only time you felt truly clean. But it was also dangerous. The change in temperature could stop a weak heart. But back in the hospital, the heat comes from the fever, not the steam. The nun brings you a drink. Caudle. A warm, thick drink made of ale, egg yolks, sugar, and spices. It is comfort food for the sick. You drink it. It is sweet, creamy, alcoholic. It soothes your throat. But you notice the cup. It is wood, old wood. The rim is rough. How many mouths have touched this cup? The communal cup. In the tavern, in the church, in the hospital, you shared the cup. Germs travelled from lip to lip. Tuberculosis, herpes, influenza. It was a chain of contagion forged in hospitality. But let's leave the hospital and go to the laundry again, but specifically the urine tax. We mentioned the Emperor Vespasian, but the collection was a sensory reality. Pots on the street corners, full as pots. You walk past them. The smell is ammoniac, sharp, biting. Men stop to fill them. The fuller collects the pots. He carries them to his workshop. He is harvesting the waste of the city to clean the clothes of the city. It is a closed loop of nitrogen. But the most dangerous fluid wasn't urine. It was pus. Laudable pus. Medieval doctors believed that for a wound to heal, it had to produce pus. They called it laudable, praiseworthy. If a wound was dry, bad. If a wound was oozing thick, creamy white pus, good. They would put irritants into the wound to make it fester. Imagine the sensory horror. You have a clean cut. It is healing. The doctor sees it. No pus, he says. We must encourage it. He puts a seton in the wound, a thread soaked in vinegar or irritant herbs. He pulls it through the flesh. The wound gets angry. It swells. It produces pus. Excellent, the doctor says. He has just infected you on purpose. He has turned a scratch into an abscess because his theory tells him that rot is healing. And as you lie there, the leech on your temple, the caudle in your stomach, the pus in your wound, you realize the medieval medical system was a machine designed to turn the human body into a battlefield. But the night is coming. The curfew bell rings. The hospital doors are locked. The watcher sits by the door to stop the delirious from wandering out. You are safe inside, with the miasma, until tomorrow, when the sin eater comes. Wait, did someone die? You look at the bed next to you. It is empty. The sheets are gone. The mortuary tax has been paid, and the corpse road is waiting. Sleep well. The sin eater has come and gone. The bread is eaten, the ale is drunk. The sins of the man in the next bed have been consumed by a stranger with crumbs on his beard. The body has been carried down the corpse road, but you are still here. The leech has fallen off, bloated and satiated. The doctor flicks it into the fire. Hiss, it bursts. You are weak, but the fever has broken. You are discharged. Go home, the doctor says. Avoid the night air and eat onions. You walk out of the hospital. The air of the street hits you. It smells of the tannery, the raker's cart, and the smoke of 1,000 fires. But to you, it smells like life. You walk home, you pass the pillory. A man is locked in. He sold bad fish. The fish is tied around his neck. It is rotting. The flies are buzzing around his face. He cannot swat them away. You pass the ducking stool. A scold is being dunked in the river. The crowd cheers. You pass the barber's pole. The bloody bandages are flapping in the wind. You enter your house. It is dark. The window is bricked up. The floor is dirt. But it is yours. You sit by the fire. You drink your small beer. You eat your pottage. You have survived the doctor. You have survived the food. You have survived the hygiene. You look at your hands. They are dirty, but they are steady. You realize that in the Middle Ages, cleanliness was a luxury, but resilience was a necessity. And you have plenty of resilience. But the story isn't over. Because if you survive the doctor, you still have to survive the law. The sumptuary laws are tightening. The window tax is rising. And the saltpeter men are eyeing your floor again. But for now, the fire is warm. Sleep well. The fire is warm, but the night outside is anything but. The wind rattles the door, a flimsy barrier against the world. You've survived the doctor, the leech, and the hospital stew. But as you settle into the rhythm of your recovery, you realize that the medieval world has one more challenge for you. The cold. We talked about the hearth tax, but let's talk about the physical reality of winter without central heating. The Little Ice Age. From 1300 to 1850, Europe got cold. Really cold. The Thames froze over. The birds fell dead from the sky. The sensory reality is the bone chill. You're inside your house. You have a fire, but the heat only goes 3 feet. Beyond that circle of light, the room is freezing. You can see your breath in your bedroom. The water in the bucket freezes overnight. You have to break the ice to wash your face. To stay warm, you wear everything. The layering. You wear your linen shirt if you have one, your wool tunic, your leather jerkin, your cloak, you wear your hat to bed, you sleep in a box bed, a wooden cupboard with doors, you climb in, you close the doors, you trap your body heat inside a coffin-sized space. The sensory experience is stuffy, dark, and warm. It smells of old straw and unwashed bodies, but it keeps you alive. But if you were outside, the frost fair. When the river froze, the city moved onto the ice. They set up booths, they roasted oxen, they played football. The sensory detail is the crunch. The ice is thick, uneven. You walk on the river. The wind whips across the flat surface. The smell of roasting meat mixes with the smell of the frozen mud. It is a festival of survival, a defiance of the cold. But the cold killed. The Great Freeze. People froze in their beds. Ink froze in the well. Wine froze in the bottle. You huddled with your animals. The cow in the kitchen wasn't just for milk, she was a radiator. The heat of her body kept the room above freezing. You lived in a symbiosis with your livestock, but let's leave the cold and go to the light, the rushlight again. We mentioned the tax, but the making of it was a hygiene issue. You peeled the rush, you dipped it in fat, but the fat was often rancid. Kitchen slush. The smell of a burning rushlight was the smell of old grease. It smoked, it sputtered, it dripped hot fat on the table, and it gave very little light. The gloom. Medieval interiors were dark, even in the day. The windows were small, glass tacks cold. The shutters were closed. You lived in a permanent twilight. This affected your eyes. Miners' nystagmus, eye tremors from low light, wasn't just for miners. It was for anyone who did needlework by a rushlight, but the darkness hid the dirt. If you could see the floor clearly, you would be horrified. The rushes, the bones, the spittle. The darkness was a mercy. But let's move to a hygiene issue that affected the very soul. The touch. In a world without germ theory, people touched everything. The relic. You went to the cathedral. You kissed the reliquary, the golden box containing the bone of a saint. Thousands of people kissed that box. The sick, the dying, the desperate. The sensory reality is the cold gold. You press your lips to the metal. It is worn smooth by centuries of kisses. It tastes of brass and saliva. You're sharing a kiss with the entire city and its diseases, but you believe it heals you. The holy kiss. But sometimes the touch wasn't holy, it was judicial. The cruentation, the trial by bleeding. If a murder victim's body was found, they would make the suspect touch the corpse. The belief. The corpse would bleed if the murderer touched it. The sensory horror. You are accused. You are dragged to the bier. The body is cold, stiff, perhaps decomposing. Touch him, the sheriff commands. You reach out. You touch the dead hand. It is clammy. Everyone watches. Does a drop of blood appear? If the body releases a gas? If a purge fluid leaks from the nose? Guilty. You're hanged because of post-mortem biology. It was forensic science based on ghosts, but let's leave the dead and go to the water again, but not to drink. To wash clothes. The soap. Black soap. Made from fish oil and potash, it smelled fishy. It was soft, black and slimy. White soap. Made from olive oil, Castile. Expensive. For the rich. The sensory reality. You are poor. You wash your shirt with black soap. Your clothes smell of fish, even when they are clean. You walk around in a cloud of marine odour. But the rich, they used musk. Ambergris, whale vomit. Civet, glandular secretion from a cat. These were the perfumes. Strong animalistic scents. They didn't master smell of the unwashed body. They competed with it. The result was a sensory clash. Sweat versus civet. Fish soap versus rosewater. The air of the medieval court was a chemical war zone. But let's end this section with the most intimate hygiene product of all, the toothpick. We talked about the chew stick, but the rich used gold toothpicks, or silver. They wore them on a chain around their neck, like jewellery. The sensory detail, you're at a banquet. The Duke finishes his swan. He picks up the gold tool hanging on his chest. He picks his teeth, publicly. It was a display of status. I have food in my teeth, and I have gold to remove it. And you? You use a splinter of wood, or your fingernail, and you hope the worm doesn't wake up. And as you sit there, in the dark, smelling the rushlight, feeling the cold seep through the walls, watching the frost form on the inside of the door, you realise the medieval world was a place of sensory extremes. The cold was absolute, the smell was overpowering, the pain was sharp, but the resilience was infinite. You have survived the winter, you have survived the doctor, you have survived the taxman. You're ready for anything, except maybe the plague. But that's a story for another night. Sleep well. The wind has died down, the rushlight has burned low, filling the room with the last tendrils of greasy smoke. You are warm, finally, huddled in your box bed, the door shut tight against the draughts. But even in sleep, the medieval world has one more surprise for you. The dream. In the Middle Ages, dreams weren't just random firings of the brain. They were messages. From God, from demons, or from your own imbalanced humours. If you dreamed of red, you had too much blood. If you dreamed of water, too much phlegm. If you dreamed of falling, the devil was trying to drag you down. You wake up with a start. You dreamed of fire. Too much yellow bile, you mutter. Or perhaps it was the spicy sausage you ate. But the morning brings a new reality. The fair. We talked about the fair as a place of taxes, but it was also a place of medicine. The mountebank. He stands on a stage. He has a monkey, he has a trumpet, and he has a bottle. The elixir of life, he shouts, cures the gout, the pox, the melancholy. You watch. The crowd is mesmerised. He pulls a tooth from a volunteer, a shill. Painlessly. The shill is acting. He sells the bottle. The sensory reality is the taste. You buy a bottle. You drink it. It tastes of alcohol, opium, and something else. Earthworms, powdered toad. It makes you feel better. For an hour. Then you vomit. It was the original snake oil. But if the mountebank was a fraud, the wise woman was a threat. We met her before, but let's look at her herbal. She knows plants, real plants. Willow for pain. Foxglove for the heart, digitalis. St. John's wort for sadness. She is the true doctor, but she is dangerous. If she cures you, she is a healer. If she fails, she is a witch. The sensory detail is the gathering. You see her at dawn. She is cutting herbs with a bronze knife. She is whispering to the plants. I take thee, herb of grace. You respect her, but you cross the street. You don't want to be seen with her. But what if the illness wasn't physical? What if it was lovesickness? Amorherios. It was considered a disease, a fatal one. The symptoms, paleness, sighing, loss of appetite. The cure, travel, or therapeutic intercourse. Doctors actually prescribed it. Find a partner, they said. Relieve the pressure. Or they prescribed shock. Someone jumps out and scares the lover. It was psychiatry by prank. But let's leave the heart and go to the skin. The pox, syphilis. It arrived in Europe in the 1490s. It was new, terrifying. The sensory reality, the sores, the great pox. It wasn't just a rash. It ate the flesh. It ate the nose. The cure? Mercury. A night with Venus, a lifetime with Mercury. They put you in a tub, a wooden barrel. They filled it with mercury vapour. You sat in the box, only your head stuck out. You breathed the fumes, you sweated, you drooled pints of saliva. The mercury killed the bacteria, maybe, but it killed you faster. The sensory horror of the tub, the heat, the metallic taste, the teeth loosening. It was a treatment that looked like torture. But let's end this section with something cleaner. The sauna again, but the public one, the stew. In London, the bathhouses were called stews. They were places of bathing, yes, but also places of other things. The sensory reality is the steam and sin. The air is thick. The water is warm. There are women. There is wine. The church hated them. They tried to close them. The stews breed vice, the bishop shouted. But the bishop owned the land. He collected the rent. It was the ultimate hypocrisy. The church profiting from the very sin it condemned. And as you stand there, watching the steam rise from the stews, smelling the mercury from the pox hospital, hearing the trumpet of the mountebank, you realize the medieval world was a place where everything, health, sickness, love, death, was for sale. But the night is coming. The curfew rings. You head home. You pass the leper. He rings his bell. Clang, clang. You step into the gutter to avoid him. You enter your house. You bar the door. You're safe until tomorrow, when the salt runs out again, and the cycle begins anew. Sleep well. The salt box is empty again. You scrape the wood with your fingernail, hoping for a crystal, but there is nothing, just the dry, splintered timber. Outside, the rain is falling, a relentless grey drizzle that turns the village street into a river of mud. You need salt, but you also need shoes. Your boots are leaking. The leather has cracked. The grease has worn off. You head to the cobbler. The sensory reality of the cobbler's shop is the old leather. It smells of tannin, sweat, and mould. There is a pile of boots in the corner, muddy, broken, shaped by the feet of dead men. The cobbler is a hunched figure. He is sewing a patch onto a sole. He uses a hog's bristle instead of a needle because it is flexible. Can you fix them, you ask? He looks at your boots. Maybe, he says, but I need leather. He doesn't have any. The tanner hasn't delivered. Bring me a piece of hide, he says. Where do you get a hide? From the knacker. You walk to the edge of the village. The smell hits you first. The sweet, cloying scent of rendering fat. The knacker is boiling a horse. A piece of hide, you say. He cuts a strip from a dead cow. It is raw, wet, bloody. You carry it back to the cobbler. He scrapes it. He dries it by the fire. He sews it onto your boot. You walk out. Your feet are dry, but you're wearing the skin of a cow that died yesterday. It is a reminder that in the medieval world nothing is wasted. Death is just a raw material. But if the shoes were a struggle, the road was a battle. The mire. The roads were not paved. They were dirt tracks. In winter, they became swamps. The sensory experience is the suck. You step into the mud. It grabs your boot. It pulls. Squelch. You have to fight for every step. Your legs ache. You're covered in mud up to your knees. If a cart gets stuck, you have to help push. The horses are straining. The driver is shouting. You put your shoulder to the wheel. The wood is wet, slippery. You push. The mud flies into your face. You're part of the infrastructure. But let's leave the mud and go to the market again. But specifically, the fish stall. We talked about salted fish. But what about fresh fish? If you lived near the coast, you could get it. But inland. The fish cart. It travelled at night. To keep the fish cool. The sensory reality is the speed. The cart rattles through the village at dawn. The driver shouts, "Fresh herring," you run out. The fish are packed in straw, they're cold, their eyes are clear. You buy one. You cook it immediately. The taste of the sea in a landlocked village. It is a miracle of logistics. But if the fish was fresh, the water was not. The public conduit. In London, water was piped in from springs, but the pipes were made of elm wood, or lead. And they leaked. The sensory detail is the queue. You stand in line at the conduit. Women with buckets, men with barrels. The water trickles out. A thin stream. It takes 10 minutes to fill a bucket. You wait. You gossip. You fight. "He cut the line," someone shouts. A fist fight breaks out over water. It was a resource war on a street corner. But let's move to a job that dealt with the ultimate resource. The charcoal burner. He lives in the woods. He builds a mound of wood. He covers it with turf. He lights it. He has to watch it for days. If it burns too hot, ash. If it burns too cool, wood. He needs charcoal. The sensory reality is the smoke. He's always covered in soot. His eyes are red. He smells of carbon. He sells the charcoal to the blacksmith, to the armourer, to the cook. He is the fuel merchant of the Middle Ages. But he is an outcast. People fear him. He lives with the spirits of the forest. But if the charcoal burner was feared, the miller was hated. We talked about the mill, but let's look at the miller's thumb. He tested the flour by rubbing it between his thumb and finger. His thumb became flattened, broad. The gold thumb. People said he grew it that way to weigh down the scale. The sensory detail is the dust. The miller is white. His eyebrows are white. His clothes are white. He breathes flour. Miller's lung. He coughs up dough. He is dying from the very thing that feeds the village. But let's end this section with the most beautiful, most dangerous object in the medieval house, the mirror. We talked about the shock of seeing yourself, but the making of the mirror was a toxic art. Mercury amalgam. Glass coated with mercury and tin. The mirror maker rubbed the mercury onto the glass with a hare's foot or his hand. The sensory reality. The mercury is liquid silver. It is beautiful. It moves like magic, but the vapours. The mirror maker goes mad. He trembles. He talks to people who aren't there. You look in the mirror, you see your face, but you're looking through a layer of poison. And as you stand there, looking at your reflection, smelling the charcoal smoke, feeling the wet leather of your patched boot, hearing the fight at the conduit, you realise the medieval world was a place where beauty and death were always holding hands, but the night is deep. The charcoal burner is watching his fire. The miller is coughing. You head home. You pass the gibbet. The bones are silent. You pass the stocks. Empty. You enter your house. You bar the door. You're safe until tomorrow, when the rat catcher comes and he brings his ferret. Sleep well. The rat catcher. He's a man who walks with a quiet, predatory gait, his eyes scanning the shadows of the alleyways. He wears a coat covered in patches, smelling of musk and damp fur. On his shoulder sits a ferret, its small, intelligent eyes watching the world with a mix of curiosity and hunger. In his hand he holds a pole strung with dead rats, his trophies, his advertisement, his proof of competence. You need him. The scratching in your walls has kept you awake for 3 nights. You approach him. "Sir," you say, trying not to look at the tails dangling from his belt. "I have a problem." "They all have problems," he grunts. "Is it the cellar or the thatch?" "The cellar," he nods. He unclips the ferret. The animal slinks down your cellar steps, a ribbon of white fur disappearing into the dark. The sensory reality of the rat catcher's work is the squeal. You wait at the top of the stairs. You hear scuffling, a high-pitched shriek, then silence. The ferret emerges, blood on its muzzle. The rat catcher descends, collects the bodies and adds them to his pole. "A penny a head," he says. You pay him. You're buying sleep. You're buying safety from the plague. You're buying the absence of gnawing. But if the rat catcher protected the home, the hayward protected the field. The hayward, the hedge warden. His job was to keep the livestock out of the crops. He patrolled the hedges, the fences, the boundaries. The sensory detail is the horn. He carries a horn. When he sees a stray cow in the wheat, he blows it. Blart! The sound echoes across the fields. The cow looks up, guilty. The hayward chases it out with a stick, but he also checks the hedges. If your hedge has a gap fine. You're fined for letting the chaos of nature into the order of agriculture. But let's leave the fields and go to the scriptorium again. But not for the ink, for the erasure. We mentioned scraping, but let's look at the palimpsest. Paper, parchment, was expensive, so monks would recycle it. They would take an old book, maybe a Greek mathematical text or a Roman poem, and scrape the words off. Then they would write a prayer book over it. The sensory reality is the ghost text. You're reading a prayer, but underneath the ink you can see faint red lines, the shadow of an older idea. We lost the math of Archimedes because a monk needed paper for a psalm. It is a tragedy of efficiency. But if the monks erased the past, the herald announced the future. The herald. He wears tabard with the king's arms. He stands in the market square. He blows a trumpet. Oyez! Oyez! He reads a proclamation. A new war, a new tax, a new law about shoes. The sensory experience is the voice. He has to shout to be heard over the crowd. His voice is trained, projected. He is the medieval loudspeaker, but he is also the genealogist. Before a tournament, he checks the knight's lineage. "You cannot fight," he says to a young man. "Your grandmother was a merchant's daughter. He is the gatekeeper of blood." But let's move to a job that dealt with the most precious fluid of all, the wet nurse. Rich women didn't breastfeed. It was considered animalistic, or they wanted to get pregnant again quickly, so they hired a wet nurse, a peasant woman who had just had a baby. The sensory reality is the transfer. The noble baby is handed to the peasant woman. She feeds it. Her own baby is fed with pap, bread soaked in milk, or given to another poorer nurse. The noble baby grows fat on peasant milk. The peasant baby often dies. It was a biological tax. The rich literally consumed the vitality of the poor. But let's end this section with a job that sounds like a fairy tale, but was a necessity. The rush bearer. Once a year, the village would gather fresh rushes from the river. They would carry them in a procession to the church to cover the floor. The rush-bearing festival. The sensory detail is the green smell. The church, usually smelling of stone and old incense, is suddenly filled with the scent of fresh green reeds. It smells like a riverbank. They decorate the rushes with flowers. They dance. It is a moment where the wild enters the holy, a renewal of the earth inside the stone, and as you stand there smelling the rushes, hearing the rat-catcher's ferret hiss, watching the herald shout, and feeling the ghost text under your fingers, you realize the medieval world was a place of layers. The new was written over the old. The rich fed on the poor. The holy was built on the wild. But the night is deep. The curfew rings. You head home. You pass the pinfold. A sheep is bleating. You pass the stocks. Empty. You enter your house. You bar the door. You're safe. Until tomorrow, when the saltpeter man comes back. And this time, he wants to check the barn. Sleep well. The saltpeter man stands in your barn. He isn't looking at the roof. He's looking at the floor. Specifically the dark, damp earth where the cows have stood all winter. The sensory reality is the reek. The ammonia smell is strong here, a sharp, stinging scent that clears your sinuses. To you, it is the smell of livestock. To the saltpeter man, it is the smell of victory. "Dig it up," he orders his men. They attack the floor with pickaxes. The cows low in distress, pulling at their tethers. The chickens scatter, squawking. The dust rises, mixing with the ammonia vapour. They shovel the nitra-rich soil into their carts. They leave your barn floor a cratered mess of loose dirt and rocks. Your animals will stumble. Their hooves will rot in the uneven ground. But the king has his gunpowder. You watch them leave. You are left with a ruined barn and a headache from the fumes. You decide to leave the farm. You need silence. You need the woods. But you aren't going to hunt deer. That is treason. You're going to hunt birds. The fowler. This is the poor man's hunter. He doesn't use a falcon. He uses birdlime, a sticky, glue-like substance made from the boiled bark of holly trees. The sensory experience is the stickiness. You smear the lime onto the branches of a tree. It is thick, viscous, smelling of boiled sap. You hide in the bushes. You wait. A thrush lands on the branch. Its feet stick. It flutters. The more it struggles, the more stuck it gets. Its feathers tear. It peeps in panic. You step out. You grab the bird. Your hands get sticky with the lime and the feathers. You wring its neck. It is a cruel, messy way to get dinner, but it works. But if the fowler used glue, the Lord used a killer. The falconer. You see him riding through the forest. He wears a heavy leather glove. On his wrist sits a peregrine falcon. The bird is hooded. A leather cap covers its eyes to keep it calm. The sensory detail is the jingle. The falcon wears tiny bells on its legs, bewits. Tink, tink. Every time it shifts its weight, the bells ring. The falconer smells of raw meat. He carries a pouch of giblets to reward the bird. He unhoods the hawk. The bird's eyes adjust instantly. It sees a heron miles away. It launches. You watch the flight. It is elegant, lethal, precise. Unlike your sticky branches. The hawk strikes. A puff of feathers. The Lord cheers. You realize that even in hunting there is a hierarchy. You are stuck in the glue. The Lord is flying above. But the hawk needs equipment, and the equipment comes from the leather worker. The jesses, the leather straps that hold the hawk. The sensory reality is the tanning. We talked about the tanner, but the leather for falconry had to be soft, supple. It was tanned with brain, the brain tan. You take the brain of the animal, deer or cow, you boil it, you rub the mush into the hide. The fatty acids in the brain soften the leather, the smell, boiled brains and wet skin. It makes the finest leather, soft as velvet, strong as steel. But let's leave the hunt and go to the war effort. Because the birds you didn't catch, the geese, they are needed. For the fletcher, the arrow maker, an arrow needs feathers. Fletching. But not just any feathers, goose feathers. And only from the left wing. Why? Because the curvature of the feathers spins the arrow in flight. If you mix left and right wing feathers, the arrow wobbles. The sensory experience of the fletcher's workshop is the boiling glue. He boils fish skins or hooves to make glue. The smell is pungent, fishy, cloying. He takes the feather, he strips the quill, he glues it to the shaft, he ties it with silk thread. He is silent. Precision is everything. If the fletching is off by a millimetre, the arrow misses. The soldier dies, but the arrow needs a point, the bodkin, a hardened steel tip designed to punch through plate armour. The sensory detail is the grind, the metal against the stone wheel, sparks fly, the smell of hot steel. The fletcher tests the point on his thumb. A drop of blood appears. Sharp, he mutters. He packs the arrows into sheaves. 24 deaths in a bundle, but the arrow is useless without the engine, the bowyer, the bowmaker. He works with yew. Yew wood is toxic. The sawdust is poisonous. If you inhale it, your heart slows down. If you get a splinter, it festers. The sensory reality is the bend. He takes a stave of yew. The heartwood is dark, for compression. The sapwood is light, for tension. He shaves it. He tillers it, bends it gradually. Creak. The wood groans. It resists. He creates a weapon with a draw weight of 150 pounds. To shoot it, a man has to warp his own skeleton. The archer's spine. Archaeologists find skeletons of medieval archers. Their left arms are bigger, their spines are twisted, their shoulders have bone spurs. The sensory experience of the archer is the strain. You stand on the line, you pull the string. It cuts into your fingers, even with a tab. The bow pushes against your hand, your muscles scream. You hold the weight of a heavy man on your fingertips. You loose, thrum. The string slaps your arm. The bracer protects you, but it still stings. You're a biological artillery piece. The state has shaped your bones to fit the weapon. But let's end this section with a job that deals with the aftermath of the arrow. The field surgeon, not the barber in the shop, the man in the mud. He has a tool, the arrow spoon, a metal scoop designed to slide into the wound, cover the barbs of the arrow, and pull it out without ripping the flesh. The sensory horror. You are the soldier. The arrow is in your leg. The surgeon inserts the cold metal spoon. He probes. He finds the head. He pulls. The suction sound. The rush of blood. The relief mixed with agony. He pours wine into the hole. Cauterize it, he says. The smell of burning meat rises again on the battlefield, and as you stand there watching the smoke rise, holding your birdlime, listening to the falcon's bell and feeling the ache in your archer's shoulder, you realize the medieval world was a machine of violence. Every trade, the tanner, the fletcher, the bowyer, was a cog in the engine of war. But the night is deep. The saltpeter men have left the barn. The fletcher has blown out his candle. You head home. You pass the leper's squint. A candle flickers inside. You pass the stocks. A man is singing softly. You enter your house. You bar the door. You're safe until tomorrow, when the fuller comes and he wants your urine. Sleep well. The fuller has come. He stands at your door with a large wooden bucket. He doesn't knock, he shouts, "Chamber pot!" It is a demand, not a request. You carry your pot to the door. The smell is sharp, ammoniac, the scent of the night's sleep. You pour it into his bucket. It splashes, mixing with the contributions of your neighbours. He nods. He doesn't pay you, but he doesn't fine you either. In the medieval economy, your waste is your contribution to the GDP. But as he walks away, slopping the yellow liquid onto the mud, you realise that the cycle of fluids isn't just about cleaning clothes. It's about building walls. The daub, wattle and daub, the walls of your house. To make the daub, the plaster, you mix clay, straw and dung. Cow dung, horse dung. The sensory reality is the splat. You're building a new wall. You mix the mud with your feet. The dung adds fibre. It binds the clay. You pick up a handful. It is warm, squishy, fibrous. You throw it at the wattle, the woven sticks. Thwack. You smooth it with your hands. Your house is literally made of excrement. When it rains, it smells like a wet cow. When it dries, it smells of earth. But it keeps the wind out, mostly. But if the walls were made of dung, the floors were made of blood. Oxblood floor. To make a hard, waterproof floor, you mix dirt with oxblood. The sensory experience. You get a bucket of fresh blood from the butcher. It is hot, metallic, clotting. You pour it onto the dirt. You tamp it down. As it dries, it turns dark, hard, almost like concrete. You're walking on a floor made of hemoglobin. It was a way to use every part of the animal, even the liquid. But let's leave the house and go to the scriptorium again. But not for the ink. For the glue. The parchment glue, or rabbit skin glue. You boil the scraps of parchment or rabbit skins. The sensory reality is the stench. The glue pot simmers. It smells of boiled skin and old gelatin. It is sticky, brown, foul. The monk uses it to bind the book. The Holy Bible is held together by the boiled remains of rabbits, but the most delicate use of animal parts was in music. Cat gut. Strings for the lute or the fiddle. They weren't actually cats. They were sheep intestines. The sensory detail is the twist. The string maker takes the wet intestine. He cleans it. He twists it. He stretches it on a frame to dry. It smells of the gut, but when it dries, it sings. You pluck the string. Twang. A pure, clear note. You're making music from the digestive tract of a sheep. But let's move to a job that required a different kind of gut. The sin eater again. But let's look at the social isolation. He lives alone. No one touches him. His cup is marked. His plate is burned after he uses it. The sensory reality is the invisible wall. He walks through the village. The crowd parts. Mothers pull their children back. He is a biological pariah. He carries the weight of the village's guilt. But he is free. He pays no tax. The king ignores him. The church ignores him. He is the only man in the village who is truly outside the system. But let's end this section with a job that deals with the ultimate system, the astronomer or the astrologer. He sits on the roof of the castle. He has an astrolabe, a brass instrument, cold and heavy. He looks at the stars. The sensory experience is the vastness. The night sky is clear. No light pollution except your illegal rushlight. The Milky Way is a river of milk. He is trying to predict the future. Mars is in Leo, he mutters. War. Saturn is in Pisces, he says. Famine. He is the weatherman of fate. But if he gets it wrong, the king is angry. You said victory, the king shouts. The astrologer trembles. The stars, they shifted. He's fighting a battle against the chaos of the universe with a brass protractor. And as you stand there, smelling the daub wall, walking on the oxblood floor, hearing the catgut string, and watching the astrologer shiver on the roof, you realize the medieval world was a desperate attempt to impose order on a chaotic reality. They built walls of dung to stop the wind. They boiled rabbits to bind books. They twisted guts to make music. They used everything they had to hold back the dark. But the night is deep. The fuller has dumped his bucket. The astrologer has gone to bed. You head home. You pass the gibbet. The cage is silent. You pass the stocks. Empty. You enter your house. You bar the door. You are safe until tomorrow, when the tanner comes, and he wants the skin of your dead dog. Sleep well. The tanner arrives at dawn. He's a man who carries his profession like a cloak. The smell of the tannery precedes him by 50 paces, a dense fog of rot, lime, and chemical burn. He knocks on your door, leaving a dark smudge on the wood. The dog, he says. You look at the corner where your old farm dog died last night. It was a quiet death, a final exhale near the embers of the hearth. You had hoped to bury him under the apple tree. But in the medieval economy, sentimentality is a luxury you cannot afford, and the tanner has a right, or at least a custom, to claim the hides of the village dead. You carry the body out. The dog is stiff, heavy. The fur is matted. The tanner inspects it. Good skin, he grunts. Gloves. He hands you a penny. It is skin silver. You watch him throw your dog onto his cart atop a pile of other skins. Sheep, goat, maybe a cat. You have sold your companion for a coin. The sensory reality of the tannery is the pits. Vats sunken into the ground. filled with liquids of varying colours and horrors. The lime pit to strip the hair. The master, a mixture of dog dung and water to soften the hide. The bark liquor, oak bark and water, to tan it. The tanner stands in these pits bare-legged. His skin is stained dark brown, leathery, impervious. He is turning death into durability. But let's leave the smell of the tannery and go to the scribe again. But not for the ink, for the eraser. We talked about scraping, but for small mistakes. Bread. Stale bread. The scribe would take a piece of bread, chew it slightly to make it gummy, and then rub it on the parchment to lift the fresh ink. The sensory detail is the chew. The monk sits at his desk. He makes a mistake. He puts a crust in his mouth. Chew. Chew. He rubs the wet, pulpy bread on the holy page. He's erasing the word of God with his own saliva and flour. It was a tactile correction, but if the scribe used bread, the artist used urine. Yes. Painters. To make certain pigments, artists used chemical reactions. Turnsole, a purple dye made from the Chrosophora plant. To activate the colour, they hung cloth soaked in the plant juice over a vat of fermenting urine. The ammonia fumes turned the dye from red to blue-purple. The sensory reality of the artist's studio isn't just turpentine and linseed oil. It is the sharp reek of the piss pot in the corner, brewing the colours of the Virgin Mary's robe. Beauty born of waste. But let's move to a job that required a different kind of chemistry. The saltpeter man again? No. The soap boiler. We mentioned the soap tax, but the making of it. Soft soap. You boil wood ash, lye, and animal fat, but not just any fat. Kitchen stuff. The grease skimmings, the rancid butter, the drippings from the spit. The sensory experience is the nausea. The boiler stirs the vat. The smell of rancid fat boiling is heavy, suffocating. It coats the throat. He tests the soap. He puts a drop on his tongue. Sharp, he says. Good lye. He's tasting the caustic soda to ensure it will clean your shirt. But if the soap was harsh, the bleach was natural. The whitster. The bleacher. He took the linen cloth. He soaked it in. Sour milk. Or buttermilk. He laid it on the grass. The bleaching green. The sun and the lactic acid whitened the cloth. The sensory detail is the field of white. Acres of linen spread out on the green grass. It looks like snow in summer. The smell is sour, milky, clean. He walks barefoot on the cloth to keep it wet. He's walking on the king's shirts. But let's end this section with a job that sounds impossible. The resurrectionist again? No, the toad doctor, a folk healer who specialised in the king's evil, scrofula. When the king wasn't available, he used a toad. He would catch a toad. He would put it in a muslin bag. He would hang it around the patient's neck. The sensory reality. You have a swollen neck, and now you have a cold, damp, wriggling weight against your chest. You can feel the toad moving. You can hear it breathing. The belief, the toad sucks the poison out of the swelling. As the toad dies, the patient lives. It was a transfer of life force, a biological sympathy. And as you stand there, holding your penny from the dead dog, smelling the tanner's pits, seeing the white fields of the whitster, and feeling the phantom weight of a toad on your chest, you realise the medieval world was a place of transfer, from the dead to the living, from the waste to the beauty, from the animal to the human. But the night is coming. The tanner has closed his gates, the artist has covered his paints. You head home, you pass the gibbet, the cage is swinging, you pass the stocks, empty. You enter your house, you bar the door, you're safe until tomorrow, when the rat catcher comes back, and he wants to check the attic. Sleep well. The rat catcher returns. He stands in your kitchen looking up at the ceiling where the thatch meets the wall. He doesn't need to see the rats to know they are there. He can hear the scurrying, the scratching of tiny claws on wood, the squeaks of territorial disputes in the dark. The roof is alive, he says. He climbs the ladder. He reaches into the thatch with a gloved hand. He doesn't use the ferret this time. He uses the trap. A simple wooden box with a falling door, or a snare, or poison. Arsenic, he whispers. Mixed with cheese. He places the bait. The sensory reality is the wait. You sit by the fire, you listen. Scritch, scritch. Then, nothing. The poison is silent. You know that somewhere above your head a rat is dying. It will decompose in your roof. It will smell. But the rat-catcher is already calculating his fee. 3 pence, he says, for the poison. You pay him. You are buying a future smell to avoid a present plague. But if the rat-catcher dealt with the vermin of the house, the leech-gatherer dealt with the vermin of the water. We met her before, but let's look at her legs. The occupational hazard. Her legs are not just scarred, they are infected. The leech bites often fester in the dirty marsh water. She walks with a limp. She is anemic, pale, always cold. She has given her blood to the trade, but she is free. She has no master. She wanders the fens, a solitary figure in the mist. The sensory detail is the fog. The marshes are always misty. The air is damp, chilling. The only sound is the call of the bittern, a bird that sounds like a booming drum. She's a part of the landscape, a human leech, feeding on the ecosystem to feed the doctors, but let's leave the marsh and go to the scriptorium again. But not for the monk, for the bookbinder. He sews the parchment pages together, but the cover? Wooden boards, covered in leather. He boils the leather in urine to make it pliable. He stretches it over the wood, but the clasps? Brass. He hammers the brass clasps, tap, tap. He rivets them to the cover. The book is heavy. It is a fortress of knowledge. The sensory reality is the weight. A medieval Bible weighs 20 pounds. You don't hold it, you rest it on a lectern. It is an object of physical gravity. But if the book was heavy, the church bell was immense. The bell founder. We saw him melting the pewter. But the casting. He digs a pit in the church floor. He builds a mould of clay and horse dung. He pours the molten bronze. The sensory terror is the heat. The church, usually cold, becomes an oven. The fumes of the melting metal fill the nave. The risk of fire is extreme, if the mould cracks. The molten metal explodes. The bell founder is a master of fire working in the house of God. But let's move to a job that required a different kind of mastery. The falconer, again. But specifically, the manning, the taming of the hawk. You have to keep the bird awake, for days. Waking the hawk. The falconer sits in a dark room with the bird on his fist. He talks to it. He strokes it with a feather. He does not sleep. If he sleeps, the bird wins. The sensory reality is the hallucination. The falconer is exhausted. The room starts to swim. The bird stares at him with unblinking eyes. It is a battle of wills, fought in silence and darkness. But let's end this section with a job that deals with the ultimate silence, the grave digger. He knows the soil of the churchyard better than anyone. He knows where the old bones are, the translation. Sometimes he has to move a body, to make room for a new one. The sensory experience is the shovel. He digs, he hits something hard. Thud, a coffin lid, rotten, it breaks. He sees the bones, the scraps of the wool shroud. He gathers them up, he puts them in the charnel house. "Move over, old friend," he mutters. He's the landlord of the dead. He evicts the ancestors to make room for the descendants. And as you stand there, hearing the rat-catcher's poison work, feeling the damp of the leech marsh, smelling the bronze of the bell, and watching the gravedigger rearrange the past, you realize the medieval world was a place of constant recycling. The dead made way for the living. The waste became the resource. The pain became the cure. But the night is deep. The curfew rings. You head home. You pass the gibbet. The cage is still there. You pass the stocks. Empty. You enter your house. You bar the door. You are safe until tomorrow, when the tithe proctor comes back, and he wants the aftermath, the second cut of hay. Sleep well. The tithe proctor is standing in your meadow. He is looking at the grass. The aftermath, he says. This is the second growth of hay, after the first harvest. It is sweeter, softer, perfect for the winter feed, and he wants his 10th. You watch him measure the field with his eyes. He's calculating how much milk that grass would have produced in your cow. He is taxing potential. You cut the hay. The scythe swishes through the soft green. You rake it. You load his cart. You're feeding the church's horses while your own cow looks over the fence, hungry. But if the field was a site of extraction, the forest was a site of conflict. The adjuster, the official who collected the fees for grazing animals in the forest. We talked about pannage, pigs. But what about herbage, cows eating grass, or mast, beechnuts? The adjuster rode through the woods. He counted the animals, but he also counted the dogs. Lawing of dogs. the expeditation. We mentioned this before, but the sensory detail of the tool used is horrifying. The gauge, an oval metal ring. If a dog's paw could fit through the ring, it was small enough to be safe. It couldn't chase a deer. It was exempt. If the paw didn't fit, the chisel, the sensory reality. You hold your dog. The adjuster holds the ring. He tries to push the paw through. The dog whines. It doesn't fit. He takes the chisel. He takes the mallet. You pay the dog silver to stop him. You are buying your dog's toes back from the king. It was a tax on anatomy. But let's leave the forest and go to the river, the swan mark again. But let's look at the swan upping, the ceremony. The king's swan master wears a uniform of scarlet. He rows a skiff. He carries a banner. He catches the swans. He checks the beaks. If a swan has no mark, it belongs to the king. If a swan has a mark, he checks the register. The vintner's company owns this one. He is the auditor of the river. He turns wild birds into corporate assets. But the river also held the royal sturgeon, the king's fish. We mentioned the transport, but the cooking, the king's chef. He has to cook a 6-foot fish. He doesn't have a pot big enough. So he builds a coffin, a pastry case the size of a canoe. He bakes the fish in the pastry. The sensory detail is the smell of majesty, the massive fish baking, the spices, saffron, ginger, pepper, masking the muddy taste of the river bottom. The king eats a bite. The rest is thrown away, or given to the almoner for the poor. It is a display of excess. A fish that lived for 50 years travelled thousands of miles, only to become a prop in a royal dinner. But let's move from the king's table to the peasant's table. The pottage again. But what if the pottage was empty? The famine food. Bark bread. You peel the bark from the trees, you dry it, you grind it, you mix it with a little flour. The sensory reality. The bread is bitter. It tastes of wood and tannin. It sits heavy in your stomach. It doesn't digest. You're eating the forest to survive the forest laws. Or earth. Geophagy. People ate clay to stop the hunger pangs, the sensory horror, the grit in your teeth, the taste of soil. You're becoming one with the land in the most literal, tragic way. But let's end this section with a job that profited from the famine. The corn badger, a licensed dealer in grain. He bought grain in one market and sold it in another. But during a famine, he held the grain. He waited. The price will rise, he whispered. The villagers watched his barn. They knew it was full. They heard the rats. They rioted. The grain riot. They broke down the doors. They took the sacks. They left the money they thought was fair price on the floor. It was moral economy. They didn't steal. They enforced a just price with axes. And as you stand there, holding your bark bread, watching the riot, smelling the smoke of the burnt barn, hearing the adjuster's chisel, you realise the medieval world was a balance between the law of the king and the law of the stomach, and the stomach always wins, eventually. But the night is deep. The curfew rings. You head home. You pass the gibbet. The cage is empty. You pass the stocks. The thief is gone. You enter your house. You bar the door. You're safe until tomorrow, when the tallyman comes back, and he has a new stick. Sleep well. The tallyman stands at your door, his stick in hand. It is a new stick, pale and smooth, smelling faintly of willow sap. The notches from last year are gone, burned in the exchequer's fire. The wood is blank, waiting for your debt to be carved into its grain. You hand him a coin. He takes his knife. Scritch. A small notch appears. 1 penny, he says. Only 19 shillings and 11 pence to go. You watch the wood curl away under the blade. That tiny shaving represents a day of your life, a day of weeding, of threshing, of sweating. But the tally stick isn't just a receipt. It is a weapon. If you lose your half, the stock, you have no proof. You pay again. The sensory reality of the tally stick is anxiety. You keep it wrapped in a cloth, hidden in a jar, buried in the thatch. You check it every day. Is it dry? Is it safe? It is the most important object in your house. But if the tally stick measured your debt, the L measured your cloth. We mentioned the king's arm, but the enforcement of the measure was a public spectacle, the burning of the false measures. If a merchant was caught with a short L, the mayor would build a bonfire in the market square. He would throw the false yardsticks onto the fire. The sensory experience is the crackle of dry wood, the crowd cheering. The merchant watching his tools turn to ash. It was a purification of the market, a ritual to restore trust in geometry. But let's leave the market and go to the sewer again, but not for the waste, for the tosher again. We mentioned the coins, but they also found metal, copper nails from old boats. The sensory detail is the glint. You are knee-deep in the black sludge. Your lantern flickers. You see a flash of green, oxidized copper. You pull it out. It is a nail, hand-forged, valuable. You clean it. You sell it to the marine store dealer. He melts it down. It becomes a new nail, or a coin. The economy recycles itself through the gutter, but if the tosher found metal, the bone picker found bones. Rag and Bone Man. He walked the streets with a sack. Any old iron? Any old bones? The sensory reality. He smells of rust and decay. He takes the bones from your dinner, after you've made broth and maybe ground them once. He takes the rags from your old clothes after you've patched them 10 times. He sells the bones to the glue factory. He sells the rags to the paper mill. He's the end of the line for domestic consumption. But the most tragic scavenger was the pure finder. We mentioned pure, dog dung, but who collected it? Old women, widows. They walked the streets with a bucket. They looked for white dog turds. The sensory detail is the glove. They wore a leather glove on one hand. They picked up the feces. They put it in the bucket. They were paid by the bucket. They were the lowest of the low, but they were essential. Without them, the leather industry collapsed. The gentleman of London walked in fine boots because an old woman picked up dog waste in the street. It was a hierarchy of filth. But let's move to a job that dealt with the ultimate filth. The sin eater, again. But the social stigma. He wasn't allowed to look people in the eye. He had to walk with his head down. The sensory reality is the shun. He walks into the tavern. The conversation stops. People turn their backs. He puts his coin on the counter. The alewife picks it up with a rag. She drops it in vinegar. He drinks alone. He has eaten the sins of the village, but the village cannot forgive him for it. But let's end this section with a job that sounds magical, but was brutal. The pearl diver. In Scotland, freshwater pearls. The mussels lived in the cold rivers. The sensory experience is the numbness. You're wading in the river. It is freezing. You have a cleft stick, a stick with a split end. You peer into the water through a water glass, a wooden box with a glass bottom. You see a mussel. You grab it with a stick. You open it. Usually nothing, just meat, which you eat or use for bait. But sometimes a pearl, a tiny, irregular, milky stone. You sell it to the jeweller. He sells it to the bishop. The bishop wears it on his mitre. He wears the product of your hypothermia on his head. And as you stand there, rubbing your numb legs, smelling the vinegar on the coin, hearing the crackle of the burning yardsticks, and watching the bone picker walk away, you realise the medieval world was a place where value was extracted from the mud, the cold, and the waste. But the night is deep. The curfew rings, you head home, you pass the pillory, empty, you pass the stocks, empty, you enter your house, you bar the door, you're safe until tomorrow, when the summoner comes back. And he has a rumour about your neighbour. Sleep well. The summoner has a rumour. It's a whisper, really. A story about Thomas the baker. Thomas has been seen walking with the miller's wife. In the modern world, this is gossip. In the medieval world, it is a legal case. The court of archaeology. Wait, no, archdeaconry. The church court. The summoner knocks on Thomas's door. He doesn't have a warrant. He has a citation. You are summoned, he says, for incontinence. Thomas panics. He knows the penalty. Public penance. Standing in the church in a white sheet holding a candle while the neighbours stare. Is there another way? Thomas asks. The summoner smiles. He holds out his hand. The blue bribe. Thomas pays. The summoner leaves. The rumour dies. Or rather, it is filed away for next time. It was a tax on reputation. A blackmail economy run by the church. But if the church taxed your sins, the king taxed your games. The royal tennis court. Real tennis. The sport of kings. But you couldn't play. It was restricted. But you played mob football. The sensory reality is the riot. The whole village against the next village. The ball is a pig's bladder. The rules are minimal. You kick, you punch, you shove. The game ranges over fields, through rivers, down the main street. Windows are broken. Legs are broken. The king tried to ban it. It causes noise and tumult. But the people played anyway. It was their release. The sensory experience of the aftermath is the bruise. You limp home. You're covered in mud. You didn't score, but you hit the miller. It was worth it. But let's leave the game and go to the scriptorium again. But not for the book. For the map. The Mappa Mundi. The map of the world. It wasn't a navigational tool. It was a theological statement. Jerusalem was in the centre. The Garden of Eden was at the top. The sensory detail is the monster. On the edges of the map there are pictures of strange creatures. Skyopods, men with one giant foot to shade themselves from the sun. Blemmy, men with faces in their chests. The monk draws them carefully. He believes they exist. Here be dragons. The map tells you that the world is scary, that if you leave your village, you will be eaten. It was a geography of fear. But some people did leave. The pilgrim, well, we talked about the foot washing, but the journey, the pilgrim's badge, a pewter badge bought at the shrine. You pinned it to your hat. The sensory reality is the collection. You walk home, your hat is heavy with badges. St. Thomas of Canterbury, Our Lady of Walsingham. You clink when you walk, the badges are proof. I was there, I survived. They are the medieval equivalent of bumper stickers, but they also grant safe passage. Bandits might hesitate to rob a holy man. Might. But let's move to a job that dealt with the ultimate journey. The sin eater again? No. The barber-surgeon again? No. The executioner. But specifically his retirement. When an executioner got too old to swing the axe, or his hands shook, he was often given a corrody in a monastery, or allowed to live in the tower of the city wall. The sensory reality. He sits in his tower. He looks at his axe on the wall. It is rusted. People avoid his tower. They cross themselves when they pass. He is the taboo man. He has touched death too many times, but he has a side gig. The rope. He sells pieces of the hangman's rope. For luck, he says, cures headaches. You buy a piece of the rope that killed a man. You tie it around your head. It smells of hemp and something else. It is a talisman of death, sold by the man who delivered it. But let's end this section with a tax that sounds impossible. The tax on silence, goes Quaker tithe. Wait, that's later. Let's stick to the hue and cry. If you didn't shout, fined. But if you shouted too much, common scold. You were trapped. You had to make the right amount of noise. The sensory experience is the calibration. You see a fight. Do you shout? Is it a crime or just a disagreement? You hesitate. The sheriff looks at you. Shout, he commands. You shout. Help! It feels fake. It is a performance of civic duty. And as you stand there, shouting at nothing, holding your piece of rope, wearing your pilgrim badge, and nursing your football bruise, you realise. The medieval world was a stage, and you were always auditioning for the role of good subject. But the night is coming. The summoner has gone to the tavern, the executioner is asleep. You head home, you pass the pillory. A man is sleeping there. You enter your house. You bar the door. You're safe until tomorrow, when the salt runs out, and you have to go to the Sultan. The salt works. Sleep well. The Sultan. It sounds like a place of industry, but it is really a place of evaporation. You're standing on the coast, near the marshes where the sea creeps inland. The air is thick with the smell of brine and wood smoke. Salt making was simple, brutal chemistry. You took seawater, you boiled it. The salt pan, a huge, shallow lead pan sitting over a fire that never went out. The sensory reality is the heat. You are the salt boiler. You stand next to the pan for 12 hours. The steam rises in a white cloud, coating your skin, your hair, your clothes with a fine crust of salt. Your eyes sting, your lips crack, you rake the crystals. They form on the surface like ice. You shovel them into baskets. You are dehydrating the ocean to preserve the land. But the fire needs fuel, wood, coal, peat, the salt way. The roads leading to the sultans were the busiest in the kingdom. Carts bringing wood, carts taking salt. The sensory experience of the salt way is the rut. The wheels cut deep into the earth. The road is a canyon of mud. You're driving a salt cart. If it rains, the salt melts. Your profit washes away into the ditch. You cover the cart with oilcloth. You pray. But if the salt was vital, the honey was sacred. We return to the bee bowl. But let's look at the mead. honey wine, the drink of heroes, but to make mead, you need water. Pure water, the holy well again. Some brewers swore that only water from a specific saint's well made good mead. The sensory reality. You carry the water from the well, it is heavy. You mix it with the honey. You add yeast from the air, or the balm of the last batch. You let it ferment. The smell of fermenting mead is floral, boozy, sweet. It attracts wasps. It attracts bears, if there are any left. You drink it. It is strong. It warms your chest. It is the taste of sunlight and flowers, preserved in alcohol. But let's leave the drink and go to the scribe again. But not for the ink, for the pen, the quill, a goose feather, but you have to prepare it. Curing. You stick the quill into hot sand, the heat hardens the barrel. It turns from opaque to clear. Then, the cut. You use a penknife. You slice the tip. You make the slit. The sensory detail is the scrape. The knife against the quill. Scritch. It has to be perfect. If the slit is too long, ink blot too short, no flow, you're engineering a tool out of a bird's flight mechanism. But if the scribe used a feather, the knight used a horse, the warhorse, the destrier. But the maintenance? The farrier. He didn't just shoe the horse, he bled it. Veterinary phlebotomy. If the horse was sluggish or ill, the farrier would open a vein in the neck. He would catch the blood in a bucket. The sensory reality, the horse stamps, the smell of hot blood, the steam rising from the bucket. Sometimes they mixed the blood with oats and fed it to the dogs, or back to the horse, dried. It was a recycling of vitality. But let's move to a job that dealt with the ultimate recycling. The paper maker. We mentioned the rags, but the process? The pulp. You take the old linen rags, you chop them up, you let them rot in water for weeks. The sensory horror is the reek. The rotting rags smell like sewage. Then you beat them into a pulp, a grey sloppy mush. You dip a wire mesh frame into the pulp. You lift it out. A thin layer of fibres settles on the mesh. You press it between felts. You dry it. It becomes paper. The paper you write on was once someone's underwear. It is the ultimate transformation of the mundane into the intellectual. But let's end this section with a tax that sounds like a joke but was a tragedy. The hearth tax again. No. The window tax again. No. The clock tax. We mentioned it, but the sensory impact on the village. The knocker-upper. Before alarm clocks, or when clocks were taxed. How did you wake up? You hired a knocker-upper. He walked the streets at dawn. He carried a long pole. He tapped on your window. Tap, tap, tap. Or he used a pea shooter. He shot dried peas at the glass. The sensory reality. You are asleep. You hear the tink of a pea hitting the pane. You wake up. You don't own the time. You rent the wake-up call. And as you stand there, hearing the pea hit the glass, smelling the rotting rags of the paper mill, tasting the mead, and watching the salt dry, you realize the medieval world was a place where every function, waking, sleeping, eating, writing, was part of a network of labour and debt. But the night is deep. The knocker-upper has gone home to sleep. Who wakes him up? You head home. You pass the pillory. Empty. You pass the stocks. Empty. You enter your house. You bar the door. You're safe. Until tomorrow, when the gong farmer comes back, and he has a new contract. Sleep well. The gong farmer has a new contract, but this time it isn't for a cesspit. It's for a castle moat. We mentioned cleaning the moat before, but let's look at the sheer scale of it. A castle moat wasn't just a defensive ditch. It was the end point for every guardrobe, toilet in the fortress. The sensory reality of dredging a castle moat is the crust. Over years, the waste settles, compacts and forms a solid layer at the bottom. But on top is a skin of algae, duckweed and debris. You are in a flat-bottomed boat. You have a long pole with a scoop. You break the crust. Crack. The smell released is prehistoric. Methane bubbles up, popping on the surface. Gas, someone shouts. You cover your mouth with a cloth soaked in vinegar. You scoop. You load the sludge onto a barge. The Lord watches from the battlements, holding a pomander to his nose. He wants the moat deep enough to stop an army, but he doesn't want to smell the reason why. You're deepening the defences with your own nausea. But if the moat was bad, the fuller's field was worse. The teasel. After the cloth was fulled, stomped in urine, it had to be raised. The nap had to be brushed up so it could be sheared smooth. They used teasels. dried flower heads with natural hooks. The sensory detail is the scratch. You hold a wooden frame set with teasels, you drag it across the wet wool, scritch, scritch. The hooks pull up the fibres, but they also break. The dust of the dried plants fills the air, it gets in your eyes, it is sharp, irritating. You are combing the cloth with a dead flower, but let's leave the industry and go to the kitchen again. But not for food, for medicine, the snail water again. But let's look at the live snail, for warts. You take a black snail, you rub it on the wart, then you impale the snail on a thorn hedge. As the snail withers and dies, the wart withers and dies. The sensory horror. You walk past the hedge. You see a row of shriveled snails on thorns. It looks like a warning to the insect kingdom. It is sympathetic magic at its most cruel, but sometimes the magic was edible. Eel skin. For a cramp. You tie an eel skin around your leg while swimming. The sensory reality. You're in the river. You have a slippery, wet skin tied to your calf. It tightens in the water. It is supposed to prevent drowning, does it? Probably not, but it makes you feel like a fish. But let's move to a job that required you to catch something much smaller than an eel. The ant egg collector. For feeding pheasants, the Lord's birds. You go to the woods, you find an anthill, you dig it up. The sensory experience is the bite. The ants are furious. They swarm your hands, they bite. Formic acid stings your skin. You sift the dirt. You collect the white rice-like pupae. You put them in a bag. You're robbing an insect city to feed a bird that you're not allowed to eat. It is a hierarchy of consumption. But the most delicate job was the lace maker. We think of a lace as luxury, but the making of it? Pillow lace. You sit with a pillow on your lap. You have dozens of bobbins. You have pins. The sensory detail is the click. The wooden bobbins click together. Click, clack, click. It sounds like rain. You work by candlelight. To focus the light, you use a lace maker's globe. A glass sphere filled with water. It acts as a lens. The light is bright, focused on the pins, but the rest of the room is dark. Your eyes strain. You go blind. You're weaving a cobweb of thread that will adorn the cuff of a bishop. But let's end this section with attacks that targeted the very soil of the grave again. The resurrection man again, but the iron coffin. To stop the body snatchers, the rich bought mort safes, iron cages placed over the grave, or heavy stone slabs. The sensory reality is the lock. You bury your father. You lower the heavy iron grate over the coffin. You lock it with a padlock. You keep the key. You're locking your loved one in the ground to keep them from becoming a science experiment. It was a tax on security, the cost of resting in peace. And as you stand there, holding the key, smelling the moat sludge, feeling the ant bites, and hearing the click of the lace bobbins, you realise the medieval world was a place where nothing was safe. Not the living, not the dead, not the water, not the light, but the night is deep. The curfew rings. You head home. You pass the pillory. Empty. You pass the stocks. Empty. You enter your house. You bar the door. You're safe until tomorrow, when the salt runs out and the gabalus are waiting. Sleep well. The salt is gone. You're scraping the bottom of the barrel again. The gabalus are waiting. But today, you decide to risk it. You're going to the coast, not to gather kelp, but to meet a boat, a smuggler's boat, the moonlight run. The sensory reality of smuggling is silence. You are on the beach at midnight. The waves are a soft hush-hush against the shingle. You see a light flash twice out at sea. A small boat rows in. Men jump out. They are carrying barrels, not of salt this time, but of brandy, or tea, or lace. You grab a barrel. It is heavy. You run up the beach, your boots slipping in the sand. You hide it in a cave. But you are not safe. The preventative men, the customs officers, they patrol the cliffs. They have telescopes. They have muskets. If they catch you, they seize the brandy. They seize the boat. They seize you. But here is the twist. Sometimes they seize the goods and sell them back to you at an auction. It was a circular economy of crime. The smuggler brings it in. The officer seizes it. The officer sells it. The smuggler buys it back, cheaper than the tax. Everyone wins except the king. But if the coast was a battleground, the forest was a trap. The verderer, the judicial officer of the king's forest. We talked about the vert and venison, but what about the assize of the forest? Every 3 years the verderers held a special court. They checked everything. Did you cut a branch? Did your pig eat an acorn? Did you walk on the grass? The sensory experience is the audit of nature. You stand in the clearing. The verderers are dressed in green, they have books, they have measured the trees, they know exactly how many deer should be there. One deer missing, they say. They look at you. Prove it wasn't you. You cannot prove a negative. You pay a fine. It was a tax on proximity to wildlife. But let's leave the woods and go to the sewer again. We talked about the gong farmer, but what about the scavenger's rate for the street? In London, householders were responsible for paving the street in front of their house, but if your neighbour didn't pave his section, you had a gap. The sensory reality. You walk down the street, smooth stone, mud pit, smooth stone. You trip, you fall in the mud, you sue your neighbour, the nuisance court, you stand before the magistrate, you show him your muddy coat. He didn't pave, you say. Fined, the magistrate says. But the fine goes to the city, not to you. You're still muddy. The city is richer. It was a system that profited from neighbourly disputes. But the most invasive tax was the one on your own body's warmth. The bedding tax. In some military occupations, soldiers would requisition bedding. They would come into your house. We need blankets for the troops. They take your wool blanket. They take your feather bed. You're left sleeping on straw. The sensory reality is the shiver. It is winter. You have no covers. You huddle with your children. You use your coats. You're freezing so the king's soldiers can be warm. But let's end this section with a tax that sounds like a joke but wasn't. The beard token again, but specifically the policing of it. In Russia, under Peter the Great, there were beard police at the city gates. But what if you couldn't grow a beard? What if you were a boy or a woman? You were exempt. But if you were a man who shaved, you were suspected of being a westernizer, a revolutionary. The sensory irony. You are clean-shaven. You look modern. But the old men in the village look at you with suspicion. He has no beard, they whisper. He has no soul. It was a tax on tradition. And as you stand there, shivering without your blanket, holding your smuggled brandy, watching the beard police check the gate, you realise the medieval world was a place where every choice, to shave, to sleep, to walk, to breathe, was a political act. But the night is deep. The smugglers have gone. The verderers are asleep. You head home. You pass the gibbet. The body is gone, fallen down. You pass the stocks. Empty. You enter your house. You lock the door. You're safe until tomorrow, when the window peeper brings a measuring tape and he wants to measure your door. Sleep well. The window peeper has brought a measuring tape, but today he isn't interested in the glass. He's interested in the door. He's checking the width. Welcome to the door tax again, but specifically the wicket door. To avoid paying the tax on a large impressive door, people built small doors inside their large doors. You see them in old churches and manor houses, a giant wooden gate locked tight with a tiny human-sized door cut into it. This allowed you to say, I am not using the big door, I am using the small door, lower tax bracket. The sensory reality is the stoop. You are a tall man. To enter your own house, you have to bow. You have to lift your leg over the high threshold, the bottom of the big door frame. You scrape your head. You're performing a physical act of submission every time you go home. But if the door was tricky, the floor was treacherous. The saltpeter again. But let's look at the dovecote angle. Saltpeter men love dovecoats. The pigeon droppings accumulating for years created rich nitrate soil. But the Lord owned the dovecote. So the saltpeter men would break into the Lord's tower. They would dig up the floor. They would disturb the birds. The pigeons would fly away. The Lord would be furious. He would sue the king. My pigeons are gone. The king needs gunpowder, the court replies. It was a clash of titans. The king's war versus the Lord's dinner. And you, the peasant, you just watched, and maybe caught a stray pigeon for your pot. But let's leave the land and go to the market cross. This was the centre of the town, a stone cross where proclamations were read. But it was also where you paid the toll. If you set up your stall next to the cross, you paid a premium. Why? Because it was holy ground. The sensory experience is the shadow. You are selling your cheese. The shadow of the cross falls on your stall. You feel protected. But then the market beadle comes. Holy ground tax, he says. You are paying rent to a symbol of sacrifice. But surely there was one thing that was free. The very act of leaving the market. The exit toll. In some walled cities you paid to get in, Mirage, and you paid to get out. Gate money. If you arrived after the gates were closed at sunset, you had to pay a massive fee to wake up the porter. The sensory reality. It is night. You're outside the wall, it is raining, you bang on the heavy wood, thud, thud. Open up! The porter looks through the slit. 2 shillings, he says. I have only 1. Sleep in the ditch, he says. You curl up in the mud outside the wall. You can hear the warmth of the city inside. But you are locked out by poverty. But let's move to a tax that targeted the very air you breathed, if you were a smoker. The tobacco tax. When tobacco arrived, kings hated it. King James I wrote a pamphlet called A Counterblast to Tobacco. He called it loathsome to the eye, hateful to the nose, so he taxed it. 4,000%. The result? People smoked other things. Coltsfoot, yarrow, dung! The sensory reality is the acrid smoke. You walk into an alehouse. The air is blue, but it doesn't smell of rich Virginia tobacco. It smells of burning weeds. It makes you cough. It stings your eyes. The king's tax has turned a luxury into a health hazard, even more than usual. But the most invasive tax was the hearth money again. But specifically, the search. The chimneymen were allowed to enter your house twice a year. Lady Day, March 25th. Michaelmas, September 29th. They checked every room. They looked in the attic. They looked in the cellar. The sensory experience is the intrusion. You're eating dinner. The chimneyman walks in. He counts. He marks his book. He leaves. He didn't knock. He has a warrant. Your home is not your castle. It is a taxable asset. And as you stand there, smelling the coltsfoot smoke, feeling the damp of the ditch, watching the chimneyman leave, you realize the medieval world was a place where privacy was a myth, but the night is coming. The curfew rings. You head home. You pass the gibbet. The bones are rattling. You pass the stocks, empty. You enter your house. You bar the door. You're safe. Until tomorrow, when the window tax goes up again, and you have to buy 2 bricks. Sleep well. The brick is heavy in your hand. It is rough, red, and smells of fired clay. You bought it from the brickmaker down the road, who complained bitterly about the brick tax while taking your money. You're going to use it to block up the small window in your pantry. It faces the street and the new tax assessment is coming. You mix the mortar, lime and sand. It is gritty, wet, grey. You slather it onto the brick, scrape, slap. You place the brick in the window frame. You are walling yourself in. You're voluntarily reducing the amount of light in your life to save a few shillings. As the last brick goes in, the pantry goes dark. The smell of the onions stored there seems to intensify in the gloom. You step back. The wall is solid. The taxman will walk by and see nothing. You have won. But you have also lost the sun. This act, the blocking of the light, is the perfect metaphor for the medieval and early modern experience. You survive by shrinking. You survive by hiding. But if the window was a liability, the empty room was a punchline, the tax on nothing. In some jurisdictions, if a tax collector came to your house and found nothing to tax, no cow, no pig, no chimney, no window, he could charge you a nihil fee, a fee for having nothing. The logic, you're wasting my time. The sensory reality is the hollow laugh. You're standing in your empty room. The collector looks around. He sees the dirt floor with the saltpeter hole. He sees the bricked-up window. He sees the cold hearth. Nothing, he says. That will be a penny. You pay him with the last coin you hid in your shoe. You have paid for the privilege of being destitute. It is the ultimate absurdity of the feudal system. But even in this absurdity, there is work to be done. The law demands it. The labour service. This was the rent you paid with your sweat. In the feudal contract, a serf owed the lord a certain number of days per week. Week work. Usually 3 days. Imagine the sensory reality. It is Monday. You wake up. You want to fix your own roof. You want to weed your own garden. But you can't. You have to go to the lord's demesne, his personal land. You walk up the hill. The steward is there with a tally stick. Ploughing today, he says. You spend the entire day walking behind the lord's ox, turning the lord's soil. The sun beats down on your neck. The dust coats your throat. You are hungry, but you cannot eat the lord's grain. You're working for a man who is likely asleep in his castle, or hunting in the forest you are banned from. And if you were sick, you had to send a substitute, or pay a fine. Idleness tax. But the most hated labour service was boon work. This was extra work during harvest time. Just when you needed to harvest your own crops before the rain came, the Lord demanded boon work. My wheat first, he says. You watch the clouds gathering over your own field. You know the storm is coming, but you are forced to harvest the Lord's wheat while your own rots in the rain. This sensory experience is the panic. You're cutting the Lord's grain as fast as you can. Your muscles burn. You're looking at the sky. Please don't rain. Please don't rain. But it rains. You finish the Lord's field. You run to your own. But it is too late. The wheat is flattened. The mildew has set in. You have saved the Lord's profit and lost your own survival. But if the Lord claimed your time, the church claimed your holiday. The Plough Sunday. We talked about Plough Monday. But Plough Sunday was the day the plough itself was blessed. You drag the plough into the church. The sensory reality. The heavy wooden plough caked with mud and manure sitting in the nave. The smell of earth mixing with incense. The priest blesses it. Godspeed the plough. But then he asks for the plough light money again. It was a subscription service for divine intervention in agriculture. But let's leave the fields and go to the mill again. But not for grain, for cloth. The fulling mill. We talked about the walker who stomped cloth. But later they invented water-powered mills to do it. Heavy wooden hammers that pounded the cloth. Thump, thump, thump. The Lord built the mill, and he banned the hand-stomping. No more walking, he declared. You must use the mill and pay the fee. The sensory detail is the noise. The mill is deafening. The hammers shake the ground. You have to shout to be heard. You hand over your cloth. You watch the machine pound it. It is faster, but it costs money you don't have. You miss the quiet rhythm of the stomp. But the most invasive tax on production was the multure of the quern. We mentioned the hand mill, quern. But the enforcement was brutal. The Lord's men would search the village. If they found a quern, they seized it. But sometimes they didn't break it. They rented it back to you. You can keep the stone, the bailiff says, but you pay a penny a week. You're renting your own property from a thief, but let's move to a tax that targeted the very defence of the home. The castle guard again, but specifically the watchman's fee. If you lived in a walled town, you had to pay for the watchman who stood on the wall. But the watchman was often corrupt. He would take bribes to let smugglers in, or let people in after curfew. The sensory reality. You're sleeping. You hear a shout. Open the gate! You hear the clink of coins. The gate creaks open. You know the watchman has been bought. You're paying for a security system that has a backdoor key for sale. But surely there was one thing the king couldn't tax. The love of a parent for a child. The child wick. This was a fine paid by a serf if his daughter had an illegitimate child. The logic. The child is a bastard. It has no legal father. Therefore, the Lord has lost the breeding rights to a future worker, because the status of the child followed the father in some laws, or became complicated. So the Lord fined the grandfather. The sensory experience is the shame. You are a father. Your daughter is crying. She holds a baby. The steward arrives. Childwick, he says, 2 shillings. You pay. You're paying for a life that the law calls a mistake. But let's end this section with a tax that targeted the very end of the day. The candle again, but the rushlight tax. In some places, even the humble rushlight, the reed dipped in fat, was considered a device of illumination, and if you sold them, taxed. So people made their own in secret. The sensory reality is the hidden light. You are in the barn. You are peeling the rushes. Your hands are greasy with mutton fat. You dip them quickly. You hide them in a box under the hay. When you light one, you keep the shutters closed. You are stealing light from the government. And as you stand there, holding your illegal rushlight, smelling the rain on your ruined wheat, hearing the thump of the fulling mill and watching the watchman take a bribe, you realize the medieval world was a place where the system was designed to leak, and the leaks were where the money went. But the night is deep. The waits town musicians are playing. Wait, do they charge? Yes. The waits fee. You pay them to play, and you pay them to stop. Sleep well. The waits have been paid. The musicians, with their shrill shawms and rattling drums, have moved on to torment the next street. The silence returns, heavy and welcome. You lie in your bed, listening to the settling of the house. The timbers groan, the thatch rustles. But as you drift towards sleep, you remember another sound. The sound of the passing bell, and you realize that the medieval tax system didn't just target the living, it targeted the dead. We talked about the Harriet and the mortuary, but let's look at the probate. If you had anything to leave to your children, a pot, a tool, a cloak, You needed a will. But wills had to be proved in the church court, the probate fee. If your estate was worth more than a certain amount, often very low, the fee kicked in. The sensory reality is the inventory. The appraiser comes to your house. He looks at your belongings. 1 table, old, 6pence. 1 bed, straw, 4pence. 1 spoon, pewter, 2pence. He writes it all down. He adds it up. Total value, 2 shillings, tax, 4pence. You are paying a tax on the accumulated junk of a lifetime, but if you died without a will? Intestacy. The church took 1/3, the Lord took 1/3, the family got 1/3. The sensory detail is the distribution. The officials take the best things. The family is left with the scraps. The widow weeps. The children fight over the spoon. It was a system designed to break up wealth before it could accumulate. But let's leave the deathbed and go to the fair again, because the king taxed the very act of measurement. The ell, the unit of length for cloth. Originally it was the length of the king's arm, but kings have different arms. When a new king was crowned, the ell changed. The standardization fee. Every merchant had to bring their yardsticks to the Guildhall to be recalibrated. The sensory experience is the saw. The official measures your stick against the new bronze standard. Too long, he says. He saws off an inch. Too short, he says. Buy a new one. You are paying for the king's anatomy. But if the king's arm was the law, the Lord's foot was the boundary, the perambulation. We talked about beating the bounds. But the perambulation of the forest was a legal survey. The king's men walked the forest boundary. If they decided the forest had expanded, they claimed your land. The sensory horror. You wake up. The king's fence is now behind your house. You are now in the forest, the forester says. Forest law applies. Suddenly you cannot cut your own trees. You cannot hunt rabbits. You cannot own a dog with claws. Your home has been annexed by a bureaucratic hike. But let's move to a tax that targeted the very fuel of the intellect. The paper tax again. But specifically the playing card connection. Cards were printed on paper, but they were stiffened. With paste, the paste tax. Okay, this one might be apocryphal, but flour was taxed. Let's stick to the almanac duty. If you printed a calendar, you paid. So people used clog almanacs, wooden blocks with symbols carved into them. Not paper, no tax. The sensory reality. You hold the heavy block of wood. It is dark, polished by handling. You run your finger over the notches, a notch for a saint's day, a symbol for the moon. You're reading time with your fingertips because you cannot afford to read it with your eyes. It was a tactile evasion of the stamp duty. But surely there was one thing the king couldn't tax. The love of God? The Peter's pence again? But let's look at the Jubilee. Every 50 years, or 25, the Pope declared Jubilee. If you went to Rome, your sins were forgiven. But you had to pay for the journey, and the tolls, and the indulgences. The sensory experience is the crush. Rome is packed. The streets are choked with pilgrims. The smell of unwashed bodies and incense is overpowering. You are pushed towards the collection box. You throw your coins. The church rakes it in. Literally. They used rakes to collect the coins from the altars. It was a harvest of guilt. But let's end this section with a tax that hits you right in the vanity again. The ribbon tax. In France, ribbons were taxed. So, women stopped wearing ribbons. They used string, or leather laces. The sensory change. The bright, fluttering colours disappeared. The dresses became plain, severe. The sound of the street changed. No more rustling silk ribbons. The tax code stripped the joy from the wardrobe, and as you stand there, holding your wooden almanac, smelling the vinegar on your hands, listening to the silence of the unribboned street, you realise the medieval world was a place where colour, sound, and light were all luxury goods. But the night is deep. The waits have been paid off. The curfew is silent. You head home. You pass the pillory. A man is there. He used a false L. You enter your house. You lock the wicket door. You're safe until tomorrow, when the chimney man comes back. And he has a smoke detector, a nose. Sleep well. The chimney man is sniffing the air. He smells soot. He smells oak. He smells potential revenue. You watch him from the crack in your shutter, holding your breath. He marks something in his ledger and moves on. You have been spared for another day. But while the chimney man hunts for smoke, the saltpeter man is hunting for urine. We talked about the digging. But the saltpeter contract was even more insidious. The king granted monopolies to certain men to collect all the saltpetre in a county. This meant they had a quota. If they didn't find enough under the floorboards, they got creative. They started digging up the graveyards, the bone earth. The sensory reality is the desecration. The saltpetre men enter the churchyard at night. Their shovels bite into the sacred earth. They aren't looking for bodies to sell to surgeons. That comes later. They are looking for the soil around the bodies. It is rich in nitrates. They shovel your ancestors into carts. They boil them down. They turn your grandfather into gunpowder. It was a tax on memory. The dead were conscripted into the army one last time. But if the dead were drafted, the living were enslaved. The Vagrancy Act. In 1547, a law was passed in England that stated, if a vagabond, unemployed person, refused to work for the low wages set by the Statute of Labourers, he could be branded with a V and enslaved for 2 years. Enslaved. In England, in the 16th century. The master could feed him bread and water. He could beat him. He could put an iron ring around his neck. The sensory horror. You are a free man. You just wanted a fair wage. Now you're wearing a collar. The metal chafes your neck. It is cold. It clinks when you move. You are property. The law was repealed because it was too cruel even for the Tudors. But for 2 years, slavery was legal for the crime of poverty. But let's leave the collar and go to the coin again. The counterfeit. Because taxes were high, people made fake money. Coiners. They melted down pewter plates. They mixed in a little silver. They cast coins in clay moulds. The sensory experience of the coiner is the secret heat. You are in a cellar. The windows are blocked. The furnace is roaring. You are sweating. The smell of molten lead and tin is toxic. You hear a knock. Is it the sheriff? If you are caught, high treason. The punishment? For men, hanged, drawn, and quartered. For women, burned at the stake. Because counterfeiting was an attack on the king's image. The sensory reality of the burning. The stake. The faggots. Bundles of wood. The smell of smoke. The crowd watching. You died for making fake pennies. But let's move to a tax that targeted the very structure of the market again. The forestalling of fish. Fish had to be sold in the market. But fishermen wanted to sell on the beach. So the fishwife was born. She walked from the coast to the inland towns, carrying a basket of fish on her head. The sensory detail is the drip. The basket is heavy. The fish are wet. The brine drips down her neck. She smells of the sea. She walks 20 miles a day. She's a human distribution network, bypassing the market toll by being mobile. She's shouted at. Fishwife becomes an insult. But she's the only reason the inland peasant tastes the sea. But surely there was one thing the king couldn't tax. The commons. The Enclosure Act. We touched on this with the grass. But the enclosure was the end of the medieval world. The lords realised that sheep were more profitable than peasants. So they fenced off the common land. They evicted the villagers. Sheep eat men. The sensory reality is the ghost village. You walk through a village that has been depopulated. The roofs have fallen in. The walls are crumbling. The church is empty, but the fields are full of sheep. White, silent, profitable sheep. The sound of the village, the laughter, the shouting, the work, has been replaced by the bleating of livestock. It was a tax on community. The village was dissolved to make way for wool. But let's end this section with a tax that sounds like a joke, but was the final nail in the coffin of medieval fun. The puppet tax again, but specifically the master of the revels. This was a royal official. He had the power to censor plays and charge fees for them. If you wanted to perform Shakespeare, you paid the master. If you didn't pay, he shut down the theatre. The sensory experience is the dark stage. The actors are ready. The audience is waiting. The candles are lit. The master arrives. He waves a paper. No fee, no show. He blows out the candles. The theatre goes dark. The smell of the snuffed wicks fills the air. The play is over before it began. And as you stand there in the dark theatre, smelling the smoke, hearing the sheep in the ruined village, feeling the collar on your neck, you realise the medieval world was a tragedy written by an accountant. But the night is deep. The saltpetre men have gone to the graveyard. The coiners are hiding their moulds. You head home. You pass the pinfold, empty. You enter your house. You lock the door. You're safe until tomorrow, when the hearth tax man comes back, and he has a ladder. He really wants to check that chimney. Sleep well. The chimney man is persistent. He suspects you have unblocked the smoke hole in the back room. You haven't, of course. You're too cold to be that brave. But as you listen to his boots on your roof, you realise that the medieval obsession with smoke wasn't just about money. It was about surveillance. A fire meant life. A fire meant cooking. A fire meant people gathering. And people gathering was dangerous. So the tax on smoke was also a tax on conspiracy. But let's leave the roof and go back to the ground, to the commons. We talked about the enclosure of the commons, the grass tax. But what about the estovers, the right to take wood? But there was another right, the turbary, the right to dig turf, and the piscari, the right to fish. These were the common rights. They were the safety net of the poor. But the lords began to erode them, slowly, quietly. The sensory reality is the sign. You walk to the common, you see a new fence, a new hedge, a sign painted on a board. Private. You stare at it. The letters are jagged, angry. You can no longer dig the turf. You can no longer cut the wood. You can no longer catch the fish. You are enclosed. The sensory experience is the shrinking world. Your horizon gets smaller. The open land becomes a grid of hedges. The wild becomes the owned. You're squeezed into the margins. But if the land was shrinking, the city was growing, and with it, the stench, the miasma. We talked about the plague doctor, but the fear of bad air drove urban planning, the street cleaning tax, scavengers' rate, but also the perfume. Rich people carried pomanders, balls of scent, oranges stuck with cloves, bags of lavender. The sensory detail is the clutch. You're walking through the street. A rich lady passes. She's holding a silver ball to her nose. She looks at you. She breathes through the ball. She's filtering your existence out of her sensory world. You smell of sweat and wool. She smells of spices and disdain. It was a class war fought with olfactory weapons. But let's go back to the market, the forestalling again. But let's look at the engrossing. This was the crime of buying up the entire supply of a product to create a monopoly. If you bought all the grain in the county, engrossing. The sensory reality is the empty stall. You go to the market, there is no grain, not a single sack. But the engrosser's barn is full. You can hear the rats scuttling inside. You can smell the yeast. He is waiting for the price to rise. He is betting on your hunger. It was a tax levied by greed. But if the merchant was greedy, the king was inventive. The ship money again. But let's look at the distraint of knighthood again. Why did Charles V do it? Because Parliament wouldn't give him money. He dug up an old law, a law that hadn't been enforced for centuries. It was zombie law. The sensory experience is the shock. You receive a letter. It cites a statute from the time of Edward II. You have never heard of it. By the law of 1307, you're being fined by a ghost. It highlights the danger of the written record. The king never forgets. The parchment remembers your debts even when you are dead. But let's move to a tax that targeted the very essence of life. The birth tax, Registration Act, but also the baptism fee. The priest charged to baptize the child. If you didn't pay, the child wasn't baptized. If the child died unbaptized, it couldn't be buried in consecrated ground. It went to limbo, the sensory horror, the mother holding the baby. She has no money. She knows that if the baby dies, it will wander the edge of hell forever. She begs the priest. 1 shilling, he says. He's holding the keys to heaven, and he is charging admission. It was spiritual blackmail. But let's end this section with something lighter. The beard tax again. Why did Henry VIII tax beards? Because he had one, and he wanted it to be exclusive. It was a vanity tax. But the sensory result was a nation of smooth chins, men scraping their faces with dull razors every morning, cursing the king. He wants to be the only man with hair, they muttered. And as you stand there, rubbing your raw chin, smelling the pomander of the passing lady, hearing the rats in the engrosser's barn, and watching the priest count the baptism coins, you realize the medieval world was a place where power was a physical weight. It pressed down on your roof, it pressed down on your plate, it pressed down on your soul. But the night is coming. The watch is patrolling. You head home. You pass the sanctuary knocker. A desperate man is holding it. You enter your house. You bar the door. You're safe. Until tomorrow, when the window tax goes up, and you have to buy another brick. Sleep well. The brick is heavy in your hand. It is rough, red, and smells of fired clay. You bought it from the brickmaker down the road, who complained bitterly about the brick tax while taking your money. You're going to use it to block up the small window in your pantry. It faces the street and the new tax assessment is coming. You mix the mortar, lime and sand. It is gritty, wet, grey. You slather it onto the brick. Scrape, slap. You place the brick in the window frame. You're walling yourself in. You're voluntarily reducing the amount of light in your life to save a few shillings. As the last brick goes in, the pantry goes dark. The smell of the onions stored there seems to intensify in the gloom. You step back. The wall is solid. The tax man will walk by and see nothing. You have won. But you have also lost the sun. This act, the blocking of the light, is the perfect metaphor for the medieval and early modern experience. You survive by shrinking. You survive by hiding. But if the window was a liability, the door was a negotiation. The door tax again. But specifically, the wicket door. To avoid paying the tax on a large, impressive door, people built small doors inside their large doors. You see them in old churches and manor houses. A giant wooden gate, locked tight, with a tiny human-sized door cut into it. This allowed you to say, I am not using the big door, I am using the small door. Lower tax bracket. The sensory reality is the stoop. You're a tall man. To enter your own house, you have to bow. You have to lift your leg over the high threshold, the bottom of the big door frame. You scrape your head. You're performing a physical act of submission every time you go home. But if the door was tricky, the floor was treacherous. The saltpeter again. But let's look at the dovecote angle. Saltpeter men loved dovecotes. The pigeon droppings, accumulating for years, created rich nitrate soil. But the Lord owned the dovecote, so the saltpeter men would break into the Lord's tower. They would dig up the floor, they would disturb the birds, the pigeons would fly away. The Lord would be furious, he would sue the king. My pigeons are gone. The king needs gunpowder, the court replies. It was a clash of titans. The king's war versus the Lord's dinner, and you, the peasant, you just watched, and maybe caught a stray pigeon for your pot. But let's leave the land and go to the market cross. This was the centre of the town, a stone cross where proclamations were read. But it was also where you paid the toll. If you set up your stall next to the cross, you paid a premium. Why? Because it was holy ground. The sensory experience is the shadow. You are selling your cheese. The shadow of the cross falls on your stall. You feel protected. But then the market beadle comes. Holy ground tax, he says. You're paying rent to a symbol of sacrifice. But surely there was one thing that was free. The very act of leaving the market. The exit toll. In some walled cities, you paid to get in, mirage, and you paid to get out. Gate money. If you arrived after the gates were closed at sunset, you had to pay a massive fee to wake up the porter, the sensory reality. It is night. You're outside the wall. It is raining. You bang on the heavy wood. Thud, thud. Open up! The porter looks through the slit. 2 shillings, he says. I have only 1. Sleep in the ditch, he says. You curl up in the mud outside the wall. You can hear the warmth of the city inside, but you're locked out by poverty. But let's move to a tax that targeted the very air you breathed, if you were a smoker. The tobacco tax. When tobacco arrived, kings hated it. King James I wrote a pamphlet called A Counterblast to Tobacco. He called it loathsome to the eye, hateful to the nose, so he taxed it. 4,000%. The result? People smoked other things. Coltsfoot, yarrow, dung. The sensory reality is the acrid smoke. You walk into an alehouse. The air is blue, but it doesn't smell of rich Virginia tobacco. It smells of burning weeds. It makes you cough. It stings your eyes. The king's tax has turned a luxury into a health hazard, even more than usual. But the most invasive tax was the hearth money again, but specifically the search. The chimney men were allowed to enter your house twice a year. Lady Day, March 25th. Michaelmas, September 29. They checked every room. They looked in the attic. They looked in the cellar. The sensory experience is the intrusion. You are eating dinner. The chimney man walks in. He counts. He marks his book. He leaves. He didn't knock. He has a warrant. Your home is not your castle. The sun rises, casting a pale, weak light over the village. You have survived the chimney man, the saltpeter man, and the window peeper. You have paid your tithe, your tallage, and your merchant. But as you step out of your door, you realize that the medieval world has one more surprise for you. One final absurd twist in the tale of taxation. The tax on nothing. In some jurisdictions, particularly in manorial courts when a serf died or was destitute, or when a tax collector came to a house and found nothing to tax, no cow, no pig, no chimney, no window, he could charge a Nile fee, a fee for having nothing. The logic, you are wasting the court's time. The sensory reality is the hollow laugh, you're standing in your empty room. The collector looks around, he sees the dirt floor with the saltpeter hole. He sees the bricked-up window, he sees the cold hearth. Nothing, he says. That will be a penny. You pay him with the last coin you hid in your shoe. You have paid for the privilege of being destitute. It is the ultimate absurdity of the feudal system. But even in this absurdity there is work to be done. The Lord demands it. The labour service. This was the rent you paid with your sweat. In the feudal contract, a serf owed the lord a certain number of days per week. Week work. Usually 3 days. Imagine the sensory reality. It is Monday. You wake up. You want to fix your own roof. You want to weed your own garden. But you can't. You have to go to the Lord's domain, his personal land. You walk up the hill. The steward is there with a tally stick. "Ploughing today," he says. You spend the entire day walking behind the Lord's ox, turning the Lord's soil. The sun beats down on your neck. The dust coats your throat. You are hungry, but you cannot eat the Lord's grain. You are working for a man who is likely asleep in his castle, or hunting in the forest you are banned from. And if you were sick, you had to send a substitute, or pay a fine. Idleness tax. But the most hated labour service was boon work. This was extra work during harvest time. Just when you needed to harvest your own crops before the rain came, the Lord demanded boon work. "My wheat first," he says. You watch the clouds gathering over your own field. You know the storm is coming. The air grows heavy and static, but you're forced to harvest the Lord's wheat while your own rots in the rain. The sensory experience is the panic. You're cutting the Lord's grain as fast as you can. Your muscles burn. You're looking at the sky. Please don't rain. Please don't rain. But it rains. You feel the first cold drops on your neck. You finish the Lord's field. You run to your own, but it is too late. The wheat is flattened. The mildew has set in. You have saved the Lord's profit and lost your own survival. But if the Lord claimed your time, the church claimed your holiday. The Plough Sunday. We talked about Plough Monday. But Plough Sunday was the day the plough itself was blessed. You dragged the plough into the church. The sensory reality. The heavy wooden plough caked with mud and manure sitting in the nave. The smell of earth mixing with incense. The priest blesses it. Godspeed the plough. But then he asks for the plough-light money again. It was a subscription service for divine intervention in agriculture. But let's leave the fields and go to the mill again. But not for grain, for cloth. The fulling mill. We talked about the walker who stomped cloth. But later the lords built water-powered mills to do it. Heavy wooden hammers that pounded the cloth. Thump, thump, thump. The Lord built the mill, and he banned the hand-stomping. No more walking, he declared. You must use the mill. And pay the fee. The sensory detail is the noise. The mill is deafening. The hammers shake the ground. You have to shout to be heard. You hand over your cloth. You watch the machine pound it. It is faster, but it costs money you don't have. You miss the quiet rhythm of the stomp. But the most invasive tax on production was the multure of the quern. We mentioned the hand mill, quern, but the enforcement was brutal. The Lord's men would search the village. If they found a quern, they seized it, but sometimes they didn't break it. They rented it back to you. You can keep the stone, the bailiff says, but you pay a penny a week. You are renting your own property from a thief, but let's move to a tax that targeted the very defence of the home, the castle guard again, but specifically the watchman's fee. If you lived in a walled town, you had to pay for the watchman who stood on the wall. But the watchman was often corrupt. He would take bribes to let smugglers in, or let people in after curfew. The sensory reality. You're sleeping. You hear a shout. "Open the gate!" You hear the clink of coins. The gate creaks open. You know the watchman has been bought. You are paying for a security system that has a backdoor key for sale. But surely there was one thing the king couldn't tax. The love of a parent for a child. The child wick. This was a fine paid by a serf if his daughter had an illegitimate child. The logic: the child is a bastard. It has no legal father. Therefore the lord has lost the breeding rights to a future worker, because the status of the child followed the father in some laws or became complicated. So, the lord fined the grandfather. The sensory experience is the shame. You are a father. Your daughter is crying. She holds a baby. The steward arrives. "Childwick," he says, 2 shillings. You pay. You are paying for a life that the law calls a mistake. But let's end this section with a tax that targeted the very end of the day, the candle again. But the rushlight tax. In some places, even the humble rushlight, the reed dipped in fat, was considered a device of illumination. And if you sold them, taxed. So people made their own in secret. The sensory reality is the hidden light. You're in the barn, you're peeling the rushes, your hands are greasy with mutton fat, you dip them quickly, you hide them in a box under the hay. When you light one, you keep the shutters closed. You're stealing light from the government, and as you stand there holding your illegal rushlight, smelling the rain on your ruined wheat, hearing the thump of the fulling mill, and watching the watchman take a bribe, you realize the medieval world was a place where the system was designed to leak, and the leaks were where the money went. But the night is deep. The waits, town musicians, are playing. Wait, do they charge? Yes, the waits fee. You pay them to play, and you pay them to stop. Sleep well, the waits fee. You pay them to play, and you pay them to stop. It is the perfect metaphor for medieval governance. You are lying in your bed. The musicians are outside. They play a shawm and a drum. It is loud, discordant, piercing. It is meant to be festive, but at 2 a.m. it is torture. You get up, you open the shutter, you throw a coin. "Peace," you shout. They stop. They move to the next house. You have purchased silence. But as you settle back into the straw, you remember that the noise isn't the only thing that travels. The miasma travels. And the king taxed the cure, the vinegar tax. Vinegar was the poor man's disinfectant. You washed your hands in it, you sprinkled it on the floor, you drank it, Posca. But vinegar is just spoiled wine. The king taxed the wine, and then he taxed it again when it turned into vinegar. The sensory reality is the double dip. You are a vinegar merchant. You have a barrel of wine that has gone sour. You paid the duty on the wine. Now, the excise man comes back. "It is vinegar now," he says. "New product, new tax." You pay twice for the same liquid just because it rotted. It was a tax on chemistry, but let's leave the city and go to the fair again. Because the king taxed the very act of measurement. The ella, the unit of length for cloth. Originally, it was the length of the king's arm, but kings have different arms. When a new king was crowned, the ell changed, the standardization fee. Every merchant had to bring their yardsticks to the Guildhall to be recalibrated. The sensory experience is the saw. The official measures your stick against the new bronze standard. Too long, he says. He saws off an inch. Too short, he says. Buy a new one. You're paying for the king's anatomy. But if the king's arm was the law, the lord's foot was the boundary, the perambulation. We talked about beating the bounds, but the perambulation of the forest was a legal survey. The king's men walked the forest boundary. If they decided the forest had expanded, they claimed your land. The sensory horror. You wake up. The king's fence is now behind your house. You are now in the forest, the forester says. Forest law applies. Suddenly you cannot cut your own trees. You cannot hunt rabbits. You cannot own a dog with claws. Your home has been annexed by a bureaucratic hike. But let's move to a tax that targeted the very fuel of the intellect. The paper tax again, but specifically the playing card connection. Cards were printed on paper, but they were stiffened. With paste. The paste tax. Okay, this one might be apocryphal, but flour was taxed. Let's stick to the almanac duty. If you printed a calendar, you paid. So people used clog almanacs, wooden blocks with symbols carved into them. Not paper, no tax, the sensory reality. You hold the heavy block of wood. It is dark, polished by handling. You run your finger over the notches, a notch for a saint's day, a symbol for the moon. You're reading time with your fingertips because you cannot afford to read it with your eyes. It was a tactile evasion of the stamp duty. But surely there was one thing the king couldn't tax, the love of God, the Peter's pence again. But let's look at the Jubilee. Every 50 years, or 25, the Pope declared a Jubilee. If you went to Rome, Your sins were forgiven, but you had to pay for the journey, and the tolls, and the indulgences. The sensory experience is the crush. Rome is packed. The streets are choked with pilgrims. The smell of unwashed bodies and incense is overpowering. You're pushed towards the collection box. You throw your coins. The church rakes it in. Literally. They used rakes to collect the coins from the altars. It was a harvest of guilt. But let's end this section with a tax that hits you right in the vanity again. The ribbon tax. In France, ribbons were taxed. So women stopped wearing ribbons. They used string or leather laces. The sensory change. The bright fluttering colours disappeared. The dresses became plain, severe. The sound of the street changed. No more rustling silk ribbons. The tax code stripped the joy from the wardrobe. And as you stand there, holding your wooden almanac, smelling the vinegar on your hands, listening to the silence of the unribboned street, you realise the medieval world was a place where colour, sound and light were all luxury goods. But the night is deep. The weights have been paid off. The curfew is silent. You head home. You pass the pillory. A man is there. He used a false L. You enter your house. You lock the wicket door. You're safe until tomorrow, when the chimney man comes back. And he has a smoke detector, a nose. Sleep well. The chimney man is sniffing the air. He smells soot. He smells oak. He smells potential revenue. You watch him from the crack in your shutter, holding your breath. He marks something in his ledger and moves on. You've been spared for another day. But while the chimney man hunts for smoke, the saltpeter man is hunting for the dead. We talked about the digging in the floorboards, but the saltpeter contract was even more insidious. The king granted monopolies to certain men to collect all the saltpeter in a county. This meant they had a quota. If they didn't find enough under the floorboards of the living, they got creative. They started digging up the graveyards, the bone earth. The sensory reality is the desecration. The saltpeter men enter the churchyard at night. Their shovels bite into the sacred earth. They aren't looking for bodies to sell to surgeons, that comes later. They are looking for the soil around the bodies. It is rich in nitrates from decomposition. They shovel your ancestors into carts. They boil them down. They turn your grandfather into gunpowder. It was a tax on memory. The dead were conscripted into the army one last time. Their very dust used to fuel the king's cannons. But if the dead were drafted, the living were enslaved. The Vagrancy Act. In 1547, a law was passed in England that stated if a vagabond, an unemployed person wandering looking for work, refused to work for the low wages set by the Statute of Labourers, he could be branded with a V on his chest and enslaved for 2 years. Enslaved. In England, in the 16th century. The master could feed him bread and water. He could beat him. He could put an iron ring around his neck. The sensory horror. You're a free man. You just wanted a fair wage. Now you are wearing a collar. The metal chafes your neck. It is cold. It clinks when you move. You are property. The law was repealed because it was too cruel even for the Tudors. But for 2 years, slavery was legal for the crime of poverty. But let's leave the collar and go to the coin again. The counterfeit. Because taxes were high, people made fake money. Coiners. They melted down pewter plates. They mixed in a little silver. They cast coins in clay moulds. The sensory experience of the coiner is the secret heat. You're in a cellar. The windows are blocked. The furnace is roaring. You're sweating. The smell of molten lead and tin is toxic. You hear a knock. Is it the sheriff? If you're caught, high treason, the punishment. For men, hanged, drawn and quartered. For women, burned at the stake, because counterfeiting was an attack on the king's image, the sensory reality of the burning, the stake, the faggots, bundles of wood, the smell of smoke, the crowd watching. You died for making fake pennies to buy real bread. But let's move to a tax that targeted the very structure of the market again, the forestalling of fish. Fish had to be sold in the market, but fishermen wanted to sell on the beach, so the fishwife was born. She walked from the coast to the inland towns carrying a basket of fish on her head. The sensory detail is the drip. The basket is heavy. The fish are wet. The brine drips down her neck. She smells of the sea. She walks 20 miles a day. She's a human distribution network bypassing the market toll by being mobile. She's shouted at. Fishwife becomes an insult for a loud woman. But she is the only reason the inland peasant tastes the sea without paying the lord's toll. But surely there was one thing the king couldn't tax: the commons, the Enclosure Act. We touched on this with the grass. But the enclosure was the end of the medieval world. The lords realised that sheep were more profitable than peasants, so they fenced off the common land. They evicted the villagers. Sheep eat men. The sensory reality is the ghost village. You walk through a village that has been depopulated. The roofs have fallen in, the walls are crumbling, the church is empty, but the fields are full of sheep. White, silent, profitable sheep. The sound of the village, the laughter, the shouting, the work, has been replaced by the bleating of livestock. It was a tax on community. The village was dissolved to make way for wool. But let's end this section with a tax that sounds like a joke, but was the final nail in the coffin of medieval fun. The puppet tax again, but specifically the master of the revels. This was a royal official. He had the power to censor plays and charge fees for them. If you wanted to perform Shakespeare, you paid the master. If you didn't pay, he shut down the theatre. The sensory experience is the dark stage. The actors are ready. The audience is waiting. The candles are lit. The master arrives. He waves a paper. No fee, no show. He blows out the candles. The theatre goes dark. The smell of the snuffed wicks fills the air. The play is over before it began. And as you stand there, in the dark theatre, smelling the smoke, hearing the sheep in the ruined village, feeling the collar on your neck, you realise the medieval world was a tragedy written by an accountant. But the night is deep. The saltpetre men have gone to the graveyard. The coiners are hiding their moulds. You head home. You pass the pillory. Empty. You enter your house. You lock the door. You're safe. Until tomorrow, when the doomsday book is opened and the final audit begins. Sleep well. The fire in the hearth has finally burned down to a soft white ash. The glow is gone. The heat is fading, leaving behind a cool, still silence in the room. The shadows that danced on the walls have settled into the corners, heavy and motionless. You're no longer the peasant standing in the mud. You're no longer the merchant hiding his silver, or the widow riding the ram, or the baker sweating over the king's herring pies. The long, exhausting day of the Middle Ages is over. The tax collector has put away his ledger. His ink has dried. His quill is laid to rest. He too is asleep, dreaming perhaps of a world where he can tax the clouds. The king has taken off his crown. The weight of it, the gold, the jewels, the responsibility, the greed, is sitting on a velvet cushion. He's just a man in a nightshirt snoring in a draughty castle that he paid for with your ward penny. The eels are sleeping in the mud of the river, safe from the steward's basket. The bees are huddled together in the hive, their wings still, their honey safe for the night. The smoke has drifted away into the sky, joining the clouds where no law can reach it. You can let go of the anxiety now. The window tax cannot see you in the dark. The beard tax cannot touch you under the blanket. The silence of the night is not a taxable commodity. As you lie there, feeling the weight of the modern duvet, softer than wool, lighter than straw, you can appreciate the profound luxury of simply existing without a fee. The history we have walked through tonight was a history of struggle. It was a history of absurdity. It was a testament to the incredible creativity of the powerful when it comes to taking from the powerless. But it was also a history of survival. Despite the poll tax, the people lived. Despite the salt tax, they ate. Despite the window tax, they found light. Humanity is stubborn. We build loopholes. We hide pennies. We paint fake windows. We endure. And now your endurance is rewarded with rest. The ledger is closed. The tally sticks are burned. The debt is forgiven for the night. Take a deep breath. Inhale the air that belongs to no one. Feel your chest rise and fall. That rhythm is yours. It is the one thing the state could never quite figure out how to meter. Let your shoulders drop. The yoke of the ox is gone. The weight of the harvest is gone. The world outside is still complicated. The modern taxman is still waiting. The bureaucracy is still humming in the background, a machine of paper and digital codes. But in this room, in this moment, there is only quiet. There is no toll bridge between you and sleep. There is no gatekeeper demanding a fee for your dreams. You are free to drift, to float away from the hard earth, away from the mud and the stone into the soft, untaxed darkness. The village is sleeping. The castle is sleeping. The history books are closed. You have survived the system. Now, rest. Good night.